In the wild regions of New Zealand, a powerful monster terrorizes those who dare to venture too deeply into the forest.
There was something standing there, looking down at him like this.
Bristles on the back of your neck would start to stick up.
And he reached up and grabbed hold of this thing.
They call it the Moehau.
And when the others came back, there was Frank standing with 3 feet of beard in each hand.
Nothing would stop a hairy wild man from Moehau.
Oh, Moehau mountain, so tall and so proud. I stand before you, I'll say it out loud. I've come to play and I hope you don't mind sharing with me some quality time.
This song is still heard in rural New Zealand. It's about the Moehau, nicknamed the Hairy Man. It's a giant, fearsome creature resembling a gorilla, reputed to have terrorized the earliest European settlers and even the Maori inhabitants of the South Pacific archipelago. It's on the beautiful Coromandel Peninsula that the most Moehau sightings have occurred. A region of unparalleled natural beauty and a paradise for outdoor enthusiasts. Keith Stevenson is a native of the region. He's convinced that incredible things go on in the depths of these green woods.
He can walk with and swing both arms, and his head can certainly rotate around. He was like he was disappearing. He wasn't coming towards anybody. He was obviously heard people and just wanted to get the hell out of the road. So and the best way to do that is get off the track. He's never very far away. You can, if you're observant enough, you'll see his footprints from time to time especially when you come to a place where the pigs where the wild pigs, they like to wallow in the mud, and that's how they cool off, and they wallow all around. And sometimes you'll see where he's had to walk along that track. The footprints that we've seen aren't all the same size, so that tells me that he's not up there on his own.
Ray Russick is the unofficial historian of Coromandel. This sheep farmer has been collecting stories of the Moehau for over 40 years. According to him, the monster is definitely part of the region's DNA. He tells us one of the famous Moehau stories, that of the Wenslig family, early settlers who had a terrifying encounter with the monster.
Frank and Mick, his brother, used to hunt in the bush, as been outlined in that poem, and they shot a wild cattle beast, a heifer, and they couldn't carry it all home. So what they couldn't carry, they hung up in this tree on a piece of rope, at least 8 foot high, okay? And when they went there in the morning to get the rest of it, it wasn't there. It was just a ragged bit of rope hanging down. All the claw marks on the trees where this thing had climbed up and grabbed this beast and pulled it down, and all claw marks on the ground, and the meat had gone.
2 hours from Coromandel lies Auckland, New Zealand's dynamic metropolis. Surrounded by extinct volcanoes and immaculately preserved beaches, Auckland is an ideal blend of nature and urban living. Of course, on these streets no one fears the Moehau, but the legend of this mythical creature has managed to capture the imaginations of certain authors. One such writer is Nicola McCloy. She devoted a book to the mysteries of New Zealand. One chapter focuses on the enigmatic Moehau.
I think that when a friend of mine told me about this story, I'm just like, I didn't know about this. This is great. Now, I have to say that it's a very North Island story, and I was born and grew up in the South Island, and we have our own, I mean, it's quite a small country, but we have quite distinct mythologies, and a lot of it is because the different Maori tribes and things, but it's the same where you have quite distinct mythologies depending on where you are in the country. And I don't know of anywhere else in the country where there's any sort of story like this. I think the other thing that I liked about it was that there were reports from the 1960s and 1970s. And so I kind of liked the idea that whatever the story was, that there was enough in it and there was enough that kept people interested, that they were still talking about it, that people were still kind of conscious of the story when they went out into the bush, you know, so that there's this sustained tale telling over what is effectively half of the European history of New Zealand. You know, there's 100 years worth of stories, or 150 years worth of stories, which is interesting to me because I think it seems so unlikely, the possibility that there's a creature there that's the equivalent of a Yeti or a Sasquatch or something like that.
I've never seen him, I've never heard him, but he must be there.
A chain of mountains nearly untouched by human activity crown the beautiful Coromandel Peninsula. This is one of the regions with the greatest biodiversity on the planet. The highest mountain, whose summit is 892 meters or 2,925 feet high, is called the Moehau. It's here that the terrifying creature is thought to make its home.
The Moehau man name comes from Mount Moehau, which is the highest point on the peninsula, which is actually quite far north, but there have been reported sightings sort of all over the peninsula. And I guess the geography there is part of what feeds into that mythology, because a lot of it is still in quite dense native bush.
It's a sacred place to a lot of us. It's Papatuanuku is Mother Earth. And of course, on Mother Earth, there's lots of sacred places. For us in Coromandel, to me, Moehau would be one of the more sacred places on the Coromandel Peninsula. And I think that would apply to most people who live in Coromandel and have lived here for a long, long, long time. Would all have that respect of it being a sacred place. Yeah. So it's spiritual, and so we respect that. So
is quite inaccessible, and you can drive around the edges of the peninsula, but getting into the hinterland is pretty tough. So it's pretty rugged country. And
there's some very unhospitable parts up there that people wouldn't even attempt to go to. It's probably too steep, too dangerous, and there are sometimes some places in the bush that you just don't even want to go there. You know yourself, you won't. No, it's not for me. I think I'll go back the other way, or I think you would know if you were in the sacred area. The bristles on the back of your neck would start to stick up. You'd feel that you shouldn't be here. Yeah, it's like that.
The Moehau is described as a cross between a gorilla and a man, standing up to 3 meters or 10 feet tall with a black or dark brown coat of fur. It is incredibly strong and responds aggressively to human presence. It feeds mainly on wild pigs.
Definitely something that's, a little bit, oversized human, walking quite tall, but a little bit hunched. Very unusual footsteps, very, very big. Only three toes, big toes in the front on each foot, and just a small one out the side.
The descriptions really change. The only thing that's consistent is that it's within the Coromandel region and that it's this ape-like creature.
Unlike Sasquatch and Bigfoot, monsters for which there are hundreds of testimonies, the Moehau is very discreet. Nicola McCloy has studied the few modern testimonials from people claiming to have seen the monster.
in 1969, there was a sighting, a woman called Vera Marshall, who believed that she'd seen the Moehau man. She was out walking in the bush and believed that in the distance she'd seen a large gorilla-like creature, and she described it as being gorilla-like. And when she got back, she reported what she'd seen to various people, and with, I think some believed her, some didn't. The main description that exists now was that she said it was a gorilla-like creature and that she'd seen it off in the distance, but it was quite clear that it was the size and shape of a gorilla.
But how has so discreet a monster managed to play such a large role in New Zealander folklore? The answer lies in a strong oral tradition typical of the Coromandel region.
Kiwis are great storytellers, and I think it goes right back, part of it is our Maori history, our Indigenous history, is that it was, until really the Europeans arrived, it wasn't a written language. So it was always in the oral tradition. So stories were handed down generation to generation.
There's another story which I've heard several times about, I'm not sure where this was, somewhere down the Moehau, I think, where there was Frank and Mick and a couple of other bushmen. They're felling bush for somebody down there.
A lot of our settlers were Irish and Scots, so they had that real Celtic thing where they loved a good yarn.
In the middle of the night they had 2 bunks on one side, 2 bunks on the other side, and old Frank was in the bottom bunk on one side, and he woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a bit of moonlight coming through the doorway, and there was something standing there looking down at him like this. And he let out a yell, and he reached up and grabbed hold of this thing to wrestle it, to whatever it was. The others got a hell of a fright. They charged out through the door and were gone into the bush. And Frank wrestled with this thing in the dark, and wrestled, and the noises coming out of there terrified the rest of them. They just wouldn't come any near the camp. And finally this thing broke free and charged out through the side of didn't go to the door, charged out through the side of the sneak out worry. And when the others came back, there was Frank standing with 3 feet of beard in each hand. So whatever it was, wouldn't have much beard left. It wasn't a pig, that's all I know, it wasn't a pig. It could have been a deer, it could have been a hairy man, who'd know?
For the Maori, Mount Moehau is a sacred place. It is the burial site of the warrior chief Tamatekapua, who organized the Great Migration of Polynesian Maori to New Zealand in the 14th century. In addition, the original inhabitants of New Zealand lived in symbiosis with the earth. The Maoris revere Papatuanaku, or Mother Nature. Was the legend of the Moehau begun by the Maori to scare off European settlers?
The Moehau itself is a sacred mountain. It's the highest point down there, and it's sacred to the Maoris. And they didn't like anybody climbing this mountain, okay? Because that's where the last place of the spirits used to fly away from, the top of this mountain. And they got onto this hairy man story, the Maoris did, and they warned people not to go up there. Partly because they didn't want them up there, partly trying to scare them with this hairy man story.
I have read accounts where they've said to people, don't go out of the village at night because there's these scary creatures. Whether that was something that they were doing in order to frighten people from coming near the village, from other villages or from other tribes or other groups coming near the village at night, or whether there was actually something, a spirit that they believed was there but wasn't, or whether there was a creature there. It's hard to say.
Oh, Maoris are very superstitious people, the old-timers. Nowadays they wouldn't, of course. But those days, they were pretty sincere. And if they got a story in their mind, it was pretty soon gospel. And they'd really believe it.
Normally, Mount Moehau and its surroundings are rough going for tourists, but one man was determined to explore it. The artist Barry Brickell developed a tourist attraction that has drawn over 1 million visitors to the area, the Driving Creek Railway, which winds its way through this seldom visited forest.
Having lived in the middle of Auckland City for all my young days, I wanted to move out into the country. I came to Coromandel in 1961 as a school teacher. But I did not like school teaching at all. I hated it. And because I already knew how to make pottery, I started to be a full-time potter, made my living from that ever since. Also, I'm an engineer, and I built the railway, designed all the bridges and tunnels, and I bought this land, which is 22 hectares, that's about 65 acres, very cheaply in 1973. And I knew very well that if I built an interesting narrow gauge mountain railway on my land, it would attract a lot of tourists. So it took me 32 years to build the railway.
See the cloud lifting a little bit out there. That's Moehau Island.
One of New Zealand's main tourist attractions is its stunning natural beauty, a fact that Barry Brickell exploits with a minimal impact on the environment. It must be said that New Zealand's flora and fauna are exceptional. Each native species is unique to the archipelago, a peculiarity that adds to the aura of mystery surrounding these wild forests where humans rarely set foot.
But you see, New Zealand didn't have mammals before Europeans and Maoris arrived. There was a land of birds, insects, and frogs and reptiles. There were no mammals in New Zealand. It's the only country of any size in the whole world where there are none at all, because we've been separated from the rest of the world for very, very long, millions of years.
New Zealand broke off from the Greater Gondwana land really early. We have some quite spectacular, spiders and butterflies and things, but we have absolutely no native mammals. So the idea, I think people kind of like the idea that there might be, this weird kind of hominid creature out in the hills there. I think a lot of the fascination is around the fact that because we don't have native mammals, that we really kind of, we're kind of like, oh, it'd be kind of good to have those. So that might be part of what drives the mythology as well.
In the late 18th century, European settlers brought large mammals to New Zealand, upsetting the delicate balance of its ecosystem. But if species totally foreign to the island can survive and even thrive there, could a large, gorilla-like monster do the same? After all, New Zealand's biodiversity has become a kind of laboratory, an ecosystem shaped by human intervention.
When Maori, to a small extent, and Europeans to a large extent, introduced furry mammals.
They brought sheep and cattle for meat and for milk. They brought with them sort of deer and a lot of animals that we now farm.
Possums, cats, pigs, such a huge variety.
And then there were animals that were inadvertently introduced, like shipboard rats, mice, things like that you think, what a great opportunity to have. You've got this island nation where you can stop things like this from being introduced. Didn't happen.
They just ate everything they could find, because the birds half the birds in this country could not fly. They didn't have to fly. And so they just got eaten and almost destroyed, almost to extinction. That's what happened, you see. That's why we built a wildlife sanctuary here, to save whatever there is left. The fence is to stop imported mammalian animals getting in and destroying the rare wildlife we have here.
Do all these barricades protect Barry Brickell from the Moehau?
Nothing would stop a hairy wild man from Moehau, because he's magic. He can go through any fence. A hairy wild man of Moehau can even walk through a concrete wall. Because it's a mythical figure, we don't have to worry about it.
The spread of the Moehau legend is closely linked to the Coromandel Peninsula's 19th century mining boom. At that time, this area was totally unexplored. Everything remained to be discovered, especially the mysteries of this dense forest.
The mining was a really, really colourful period in New Zealand's history, and it was a really key period. I think it brought a lot of money into the country. Brought a lot of money into the country when gold was sold. There was a lot of wealth that came from it. So it really it was in a lot of ways the backbone of the establishment of of New Zealand as we know it now, the establishment of various cities.
It was the miners who propagated the Moehau legend, with stories of the terrifying hairy man dominating campfire conversation. But perhaps some of these immigrant workers had a personal stake in keeping certain areas of the wilderness off limits to others, areas that might be rich in gold or minerals.
On the whole, they were pretty rough and ready sort of characters who probably, they worked hard and they played hard. When they earned their money, they liked to drink and they liked to tell stories. The stories that I've read, particularly the reports in the 1870s, around the gold mining times, the 1860s and 1870s, it's always been quite threatening, quite scary kind of creature. And that could be down to people trying to protect their gold claims. It could also be down to the fact that the evenings were quite long and there was a reasonable amount of drink around. And there were a lot of people that, these guys were here from all over the world and liked to tell stories. And probably some of them came from the California rushes, some of them probably came from the Yukon and came from places where those stories were being told as well. So, you kind of look at where they came from and where they were bringing those oral traditions from. So, maybe that's where some of those stories came from.
They used that story to sort of discourage people from sniffing around the bush too much. The miners wanted to go and explore it themselves. They didn't want other people in there, and they to try and scare people from going in there to prospect. And the Maoris, of course, had their own agenda. They didn't want their spirits interfered with up there.
I can just imagine them sitting around a campfire of an evening, and even the Coromandel, it still gets pretty cold during the winter, cold evening, couple of bottles of whiskey, got the fire going, and they would be telling stories, and each one was probably getting bigger than the other one, and they'd be trying to outdo each other. And you'd have a few guys who are just sitting there listening, having a laugh, but you can just imagine there being 2 or 3 of these guys who've just been everywhere and seen everything and just really want to tell a good story.
One non-native species in particular, the wild pig, has reproduced throughout the region with devastating consequences for plant life. Its history is linked tightly with the Moehau legend, for it was in hunting these wild pigs that natives had many of their most terrifying encounters with the monster.
He's looking pretty moth-eaten now, but he was one of the bigger pigs I'd caught. You can see the big tusks that they have on them, eh? Mostly pigs are caught with dogs these days. You just go into the bush and the dogs will find a pig sign and go away on it and find the pig with a bit of luck. We have hunted pigs, all my life sort of thing, and it's not so much now, but a few years ago we used to lose probably average of 60 or 80 lambs a year that the pigs would kill and eat them as they're about 3 or 4 days old. They just go after a small lamb that can't run very fast and catch it and eat it. And they skin them a very unique way, where they go for the guts and pull them inside out, and all that's left is the legs turned inside out, the skin, and the legs with the feet all bitten off, all just laying there like that.
In 1972, there's a couple of local lads who went off up into the hills pig hunting.
Beside their camp at Waiara, there was a big raupu swamp. I think it's not there anymore. And they had these pig dogs that were scared of nothing, these pig dogs that they had.
And they love nothing more than getting out into really dense bush and hunting wild pigs. And the wild pigs up in those areas, They have not seen human beings before, a lot of them. You know, it's really dense, really rough territory. And some of these guys will go for 2 or 3 days, or longer, a week, take provisions on their backs and just get right out into the back of nowhere.
And one night the dog started growling, and then they started whining, and they sort of whining in fear, and they didn't quite know what the story was, so they let the dogs off. And they charged into this rapu swamp, and there was a noise like a thrashing machine in there. The dogs came out again. They were so scared the hair wasn't standing on end, it was actually standing forward. That's how scared these dogs were. Back into their kennels, and they wouldn't get out again. In the morning they investigated, and all this rapu in the middle of this rapu was all beaten flat, and this monster had gone. Other people had actually claimed to have seen it in a distance. A couple of pig hunters saw him somewhere on the ridge about 300 metres away, and by the time they got over to where he was, all that was there was the footprints. He'd gone. Pretty sort of elusive character, this hairy man. He didn't hang around.
Once the creature had sort of ambled off, these guys claimed that they'd gone down and had a look at where he'd been standing, looked at where he had been, and that in that place where he had been, obviously there'd been a bit of rain, it was a bit muddy or something, because they reckon that they saw a footprint, a sort of an ape-like footprint, but that it was 35 centimetres long.
I've done quite a lot of hunting in the bush and myself and that, and I've never seen any sign of any hairy man. But bearing in mind that he actually lived down Waiara, in that area down there, where I've never hunted. I've hunted a lot of this country, but not down there. But I think if you ask some of the hunters down there whether they've ever seen the hairy man, some of them might claim to have.
One man knows the Coromandel region better than anyone. Marcus Ward, a farmer who has lived in the shadow of Mount Moehau for 70 years. He's familiar with the legend of the hairy man, but he walks his land and the wilderness without fear.
Well, I've been there all my life and I've never seen it. My grandmother, she was there for 65 years and she never saw it. Never seen his footprint or never even seen where he could have been. You know, no big marks or, you know, how bears make marks on trees. Well, nothing like that. And we've done search and rescue up there, getting people out with broken legs and limbs and that type of thing. So we've had ample opportunity to look around.
People seem to think it's a fact, and I think it's just a very delightful bit of fiction.
My sense would be that there is something that is the basis for these stories, and that they've been sustained through that oral tradition and through that real love of spinning a good yarn and telling a really good story. Some stories say that it's some kind of hominid creature, some stories that it's some kind of ape creature, but that it just seems so completely unlikely that there is this creature in a country that has nothing but birds and lizards and frogs.
Over the years, many non-native species of animal have been introduced to New Zealand. Is it possible that was the case with the Moehau? Could the Moehau be just a gorilla?
I would find it hard to believe that it's something that has survived since the country split from Gondwanaland. So for me, I think that the basis of it probably has come from stories of animals coming off ships. It could well be that there was gorillas, you know, go missing from circuses or off ships in the 1800s. There were exotic animals being brought here for entertainment, and as early as, say, I think around the 1860s. So it's not outside the realms of possibility.
One of the stories is that there was sailing ships, which used to be numerous those days, of course, carting timber away from Coromandel and the Moehau down there further, and they quite often had mascots on the boat. And the story is that this mascot was a gorilla on one of these boats, and he got ashore. But he must have taken a girlfriend with him, because or else he lived for 200 years, I don't know. And he just lived in the bush.
If it was, say, 2 animals in the 1870s, you would think that by now, and there's still sightings in 1969, 1972, you would think that by now there would be a reasonably large community. So I find it hard to believe that they're still in existence today. But that's not to say that there wasn't something that out there that had maybe come off a boat from the traders in the 1860s, 1870s. It would have to be at least one male, one female, or a pregnant female, and then you're going to have breeding issues. But that there would be a significant population by now, if indeed it still existed. And I think if there was a significant population by now, then perhaps there would be more regular sightings.
It's possible that alcohol loosened the tongues of travelers to the Coromandel region, people eager to frighten and entertain one another with stories.
Sometimes in the wool shed, after shearing, you'd always have a couple of beers, and it might be in a couple of more beers, and then the stories come out and all the rest of it. Some people scoff at the stories, and some people get intently interested in the stories, and the storytellers get more and more into it, and this is how it goes.
Often after they'd been at the pub, you know, that helps to tell a story.
And there's another story about a couple of guys in a car. They'd been to the Coromandel pub. They're heading home. They got on top of the hill somewhere not far from Coromandel, and out of the tree that was overhanging the road swung this apparition. Swung down the tree and landed on the road in front of them. They stopped the car, put it in reverse, and backed all the way back to Coromandel, to the pub. One was a Maori guy, one was a Pākehā guy. And when they charged into the pub and grabbed their first drink, slowly the colour came back, and this Maori guy, he got such a fright that he was so pale, they thought he was a white guy.
Never set eyes on him. And I don't think I ever will.
I think we get a lot of people who do a little bit of making out they know a lot more than what they do, and it's only because they've heard a little bit and then they've added a bit more to it. We might not hear anything or anybody say anything for 10 years, and then we might get something that might turn up in the paper with a picture, or somebody might have been up the Cape there somewhere, maybe come ashore in the kayak or the boat, might have, you know, seen something that they thought, geez, I haven't seen one of that, anything like that before.
But always there are those with a keen interest in the monster, and regular forest goers continue to collect clues and strange sightings that revive interest in the legend.
There's stories about how they found him, evidence of him living in caves and all the rest of it, and bones and things there.
We think we come across somewhere where he was staying one time in one of the caves. There was quite a lot of excrement at one end of the cave, and it certainly wasn't normal human. And stuff off he would have been eating. Maybe he might have cooked up a couple of possums or had a bit of wild pork, or who knows, but there were certainly bones. So, and we found more than one spot, and the footprints, but no sighting.
I think probably the early settlers before the Europeans got here, perhaps they used caves to put bodies and store remains in. That'd be what that person saw.
I think it's a lovely story, but I have a feeling it's just a very good legend. And it causes a lot of interest. You know, we like to talk about it or laugh about it. But I do have my doubts.
Marcus Ward and his wife, farmers who've lived in the area for a long time, do not fear the Moehau. On the contrary, they think the monster legend makes for a great children's story. Anne Ward even wrote one for her grandchildren.
You can drive the book.
Once upon a time there lived 2 boys, and they lived with their parents at Moehau on the Coromandel Peninsula. One day, Simon and John decided to go on a really big adventure. They were going to hunt for the ugly Moehau monster. In the middle of the night, there was a noise. The noise sounded like footsteps coming closer and closer to the hut. Then they heard a second sound. It was not frightening. It sounded like someone crying. I'm lost, said the monster. I've just come in out of the cold. I'm really friendly. We won't eat you if you won't eat us, said Simon in his big daddy voice. Really, he was not scary, like the people thought, but a very kind and gentle monster.
That's a good little story for little children. Anne's read it at the play school and the little kiddies love it.
Despite the scarcity of evidence, and even if the Moehau no longer dominates everyday conversations in the Coromandel Peninsula, great care is taken to preserve its memory in popular culture.
I have 14 monsters. Yes, we have Mo as our monster really, and so Mo comes from the legend of the Moehau monster, and the monster himself is quite a scary image, but Mo is a little educational, fluffy, muppety character that has evolved from that into a New Zealand-based program that actually all kids seem to really relate to more than a lot of the overseas TV programs that are available. And because he's located in New Zealand and goes to places they know, it's cool, it's fantastic. And they often talk about him and still draw him in the classroom.
For the children of New Zealand, is the Moehau more myth than monster? Has it lost its historical dimension?
He's Mo, but he's not a real monster, he's just a puppet.
They often will refer to Mo as if we're doing alphabet work, they talk about seeing the alphabet on Mo. But a couple of the children in the class live up on Mount Moehau, and so they have a relationship with the stories of the monster itself, and the monster with the sharp nails that catches fish and catches people. And they haven't really made the connection between the Mo program and the monster on their mountain. They're two different entities to them. Caretaker died 2 weeks ago. He believed that he had seen him several times, and there are people in the community who believe that he's real. One of the wee chaps, he's away today, goes pig hunting regularly with his dad, and he believes quite vehemently that he's experienced the monster, that he's seen him when he's been out pig hunting. They become more aware of it, I think, as they get out into the bush. A lot of the children start going pig hunting with their fathers when they're 7, 8, and that's really when the stories start to surface. Yeah, so the shadowy creatures that follow them. I know that being in the bush can be scary, and you could imagine a monster out there.
And it has sharp claws like this.
Do I personally think it's real? Probably not. But there's lots of ways of explaining phenomenon, and that doesn't have to be in our terms. It's certainly in the forest, and there are a number of people around who believe that they have experienced them.
I suppose if you easily got the jitters and got frightened, you could make it do all sorts of things in your imagination, couldn't you?
For her part, Nicola McCloy, author of the book on the mysteries of New Zealand, considers herself a moderate skeptic, but she believes the Moehau to be more than just a fable.
In this country, we have had birds that have been declared extinct. There's a bird called takahe in Fiordland, and it was declared extinct for years. Everyone was like, nah, that's it, there are no more. And Geoffrey Orwell went off into Fiordland and discovered a population of takahe. So, you know, even though it seems like a small country, you never can categorically say that's not there. I think that the weight of evidence would suggest that it's not, purely because the chances of an early hominid surviving the split from Gondwana land when there is no other mammal life here, unlikely. And then if the other scenario were to be true, where there was gorillas or apes of some sort that have escaped from ships, you would have to have had two, and then you would have, 150 years later, you'd have a sustained population. It would be really hard to hide. But again, you know, it's difficult to say never, because there have been these creatures that have been declared absolutely to be extinct and have been rediscovered. So there are parts of this country where you just never know what's going on there.
The legend of the Moehau doesn't just survive in children's stories. The legendary strength of the monster has inspired a popular sporting event in New Zealand. And naturally, it's a grueling limit-testing competition.
For years they had a multi-sport race down on the Coromandel. So I think it was a kayak bike run race. You know, really tough race, which was actually called the Moehau Man. So the person that won it was the Moehau Man for the year. So, you know, it is quite anchored in the mythology of the area, yeah.
Some say you have to be mad to attempt the Moehau, a 116-kilometre slog on sea, bike and foot.
Keith Stevenson, a Moehau fanatic, is one of the organizers of this race.
In the adventure race, you're always off in the bush somewhere, or up a river somewhere else, or exploring into all these different places, so it makes it exciting. Very good team building discipline, and lots of fun. The first time we put an event on which started in Coromandel, and we had to kayak so far down going up north, and then we got out of our kayaks, and then we mountain biked right up around the top of the cape, and then we did another run. And all the time, when we're doing all these different disciplines, we're working our way right around Mount Moehau.
The route is 70 kilometers or 44 miles long. Is a meeting with the Moehau part of the bargain?
It is the home of the Moehau monster, and you will be up there in his area, so to keep a lookout. And I know quite a few of them were taking cameras in case they, you know, got a sighting. Yeah, I believe he's in there. Yeah, whoever he is, whatever he is.
There was lots of new people come in, and very interested, as you are yourselves, this hairy man has sort of kept it revived all the time, keeping on reviving the story, and that's why it gives it legs, and it just keeps going.
If there's more people that go up into the bush, maybe someday somebody might be able to, yeah, stop and talk to him. Who knows? It would be nice to know how long he's been up there.
You know, as you get older, you realise the value of those stories, whether they were true or not doesn't matter. But you didn't sort of value them when they were told to you, and you try and recall these stories, and those are the only ones that I can sort of truthfully pass on.
In the end, is the Moehau nothing more than a good story? It hardly matters, because New Zealand has fully embraced the legend.
I like the myth and the stories that this has generated. I don't have to believe in anything if I don't want to. People love stories, particularly children. They love myths and stories, don't they? Gets the imagination going.
On the Coromandel, anything's possible. Because it's such because it is such a wild kind of a place, and because there are, you know, communities there who don't want the intrusion of the attention and the intrusion of other people. There are a lot of, you know, people there that have moved there in order to get away from the rat race, so they kind of want to just keep themselves to themselves. So maybe if they did see something, then they're not going to say anything because they don't want the attention.
I think he has a right to his peace and his freedom, and if he's got some secrets that he doesn't want to share, I think that should be his right. In our own way, I think we all respect that, but we'd still like to be able to catch up to him and and have a conversation someday.
To keep the legend alive, because it is rather a nice one, you must admit.
He's never been known to do any mischief to anyone, so it's just a fable, really.
Where else do you go to look for a monster that is such a lovely place?
That's the calls that I've heard them make.
In the tropical forests of Australia,
They find kangaroos with their heads ripped off.
a hairy, imposing monster.
That's when they saw the creature reaching over my car and shaking it from side to side.
They could hear the footsteps thumping away, and then they heard them behind them.
Terrorizes all who dare approach it.
Something is here, something's around us. Don't anyone move.
Beware the Yowie. Queensland, Australia. Because of its 300 days of blue sky each year, Australians have nicknamed it the Sunshine State. More than 2 million tourists flock there every year to discover the Gold Coast's beautiful beaches and breathtaking scenery. Its hinterland consists of a string of small villages encircled by some of the richest and densest forests in Australia. But what visiting nature lovers do not know is that the Yowie, a large, hairy, and aggressive biped, also calls these forests home. Ron Quinton understands the danger. For this native of the region, there's no doubt that these tropical forests hide the Yowie.
When I was younger, we used to do a lot of motocross riding through the bush. And I'd see strange things like snapped trees and holes dug as though something was looking for water, and it wasn't, like they weren't natural, and like paths lead into nowhere. They're just too far out for any human to even bother doing that. I didn't think much of it back then, and then just as years go by, you see the odd newspaper clip, oh, Yowie sighted. And then I think back to, like I said, when I was younger, when we used to go out the bush all the time and see all these snapped trees, and apparently they're what they call their territorial markers.
And on one excursion, Ron Quinton had an encounter he will never forget.
About 6 months ago, my son and nephew, we went for a drive out to a section of track, and it was a dead end onto a little creek. There was a gully down beside me, just led into thick scrub. I could hear something moving through the gully as I was walking back to the car. We were in the middle of nowhere. Nobody was down there. You could hear this thing plain as day walking like parallel with me as I was walking back. This thing was walking. So then I waved to my son to come a bit closer, and as he was coming closer, we could hear rocks banging together down in this gully. Something was bashing rocks together. It's just bang, bang. And there was birds further down the track just going ballistic. I've never heard anything like it in my life. Jumped in the car and hightailed out. Yeah, chickens. I've seen enough evidence to know that it's not human activity that's out there.
Less than an hour's drive from the Yowie's wilderness lies Brisbane, the dynamic capital of the state of Queensland.
My name is Daniel Geschwind. I work for the Queensland Tourism Industry Council. We are in the capital of Queensland, Brisbane. Australia was only settled by immigrants from Europe just over 200 years ago. It had a native population, of course, who is still very much present and very much a part of this country. Since settlement here, the city has evolved very rapidly from a slumbering country town only maybe 30 or 40 years ago to a modern, vibrant city that can now position itself as genuinely a global and world city from such humble beginnings. But In that evolution, we have retained a friendly character. The lifestyle is what the locals enjoy, and that lifestyle is also what attracts visitors, we believe, in our great cultural institutions that we now have in the city, galleries, performing arts centres. This city reaches out to the green and blue, fabulous coastlines within 1 or 2 hours of the city centre here. It has an incredible surf break in many places, very popular weekend destinations, and very popular destinations for our overseas visitors as well. You are here very much still in touch with nature and the environment. One of the things that amazes visitors from most places in the world when they come here is the sense of space, whether that's on the ocean, in the hinterland, the rainforest environment, remnant rainforests that very much are intact, like they used to be thousands of years ago. Before the times of our continents shaping as they are today, a lot of people camp around here. Of course, camping is a big thing in Australia, and there's all sorts of noises going on here at night when you camp somewhere out in the bush. And like everywhere else, there's always a bit of mystery, and there's nowhere better than here to have a bit of mystery. We have a lot of blank, unexplored spaces still, with lots of inaccessible terrain. Who knows what lurks there?
Many Australians also believe that these forests are full of mystery. And here, everyone has heard of the Yowie.
Oh yeah, it's been talked about for a long, long time.
There's claimed to be sightings all up the east coast of Queensland.
Oh well, apparently in the 70s, I think, they said that there was a Yowie sighting.
And I think people that saw him only got a glimpse of him.
Either he's a very fast runner or, you know, there's obviously more than one.
These myths, or whether they're real or not, come from Aboriginal culture, I think.
Pretty hairy sort of a man, fairly big.
Do I believe in it personally? No.
With stories like that back in the Aboriginal dream time, well, I think it makes it more credible. It's good to keep an open mind.
In this region of Queensland, one man spends all his free time in search of the Yowie.
My name is Ray Doherty. I am a Yowie / wildlife researcher / photographer. During the real time, I work in the corporate finance industry. And we've been researching Yowies very heavily, almost obsessively, for 5-6 years now. Even though Australia is almost the size of the United States, 45% of our country has never been discovered. It's never been explored, 45%. So that means there's a lot of land left where these things could easily live in seclusion. But what we're finding through witness reports and through the work of other researchers is that these things are coming closer to the city, and more people are finally being brave enough to stick their hand up and say, yes, we've had an experience or we've had an encounter with something that fits that profile.
Accounts of the Yowie describe an imposing creature standing 2 to 3 meters or 6 to 9 feet tall, its muscular body covered in brown or black fur. Experts describe it as timid, but considering Ray Doherty's encounter with the monster, it can also prove to be violent and aggressive.
One of my great passions is astrophotography. We were stargazing about 3 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. The weather moved in. We couldn't see anything with the clouds, and because my friends tell me I have a bad snoring problem, so they made me sleep in the car. At about 3:30 in the morning, I felt something brush up against my car, and it was growling, and I thought it was my friends playing a joke. So I kicked the window, thinking it was them playing a game, and then it was getting really loud and really quite a few roars and things of that nature, and this thing just started rocking my car and shaking me from side to side, and it was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. I mean, I could feel something against the car, I could hear it, I could feel the roof of the car, the popping in. The whole thing only went for maybe a minute or two, but it felt like 10, 15 minutes. But my friends came out of the house with a high-powered spotlight, and that's when they saw the creature reaching over my car and shaking it from side to side. And then they called at it, and it roared back at them, and then it took off over the fence and ran away. I got out of the car, I had a busted shoulder, I had a busted eye. The roof of my car was dented in from elbows pushing down as it reached over the car, and you know, it had to be 8 foot tall, you know, 700-800 pounds or 300-400 kilos, and it was wrapped over my car and it wasn't happy. So I started 6 years ago really investigating reports at first, and then we developed a theory, and we started trying to prove that theory, and then we got a lot of results, and then we got more results. So this is continuation along that theory and building networks with scientists and educational institutions in order to help us validate any evidence we get. You know, we think we're getting close, slowly but surely. We're getting close.
As part of his research, Ray Doherty contacted the most famous Australian cryptozoologist, Gary Opit.
So I'm approached by a lot of people like Ray Doherty and other researchers that have seen strange things in the forest. And so the Yowie, it looks very much like the general impression of a Yeti or a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. It looks very much like a large ape-like creature. The sightings are very similar. There's been both males and females, and the females have mammary glands, you know, mammaries. So that tends to show that they're most likely to be a true primate. The females and young very rarely recorded, nearly always encounters with males. They act very similar to encountering gorillas in the Congo. They don't like being seen, so they seem, I would imagine, to live in very small numbers and have very large territories. But of course, we've got no physical evidence of their existence whatsoever, which makes it so interesting. It's a true mystery.
Despite the lack of hard evidence definitely proving the Yowie's existence, sightings continue to rise.
There's countless, hundreds and hundreds of stories of people of all different walks of life that have seen these things in the flesh. Even if 99% of them are bullshitting, there's 1% that's not. And we had a bit of an incident here, the nephew and myself, would have been about 2 months ago. A couple of rangers come through and they pulled over, and I just got into a conversation and said, oh look, yeah, there's a couple of areas in there that are a bit spooky. You hear guys talking about they find kangaroos with their heads ripped off and all this sort of stuff, you know. And they said to me, look mate, you wouldn't believe what goes on in here. And this is all thick forestry, and they wouldn't elaborate anymore, and just jumped in the car and drove off.
Gary Opit was a forest ranger in the area in the 1970s, and he has seen his fair share of strange and unexplained phenomena.
And one night, something began beating upon the ranger's quarters, which is just a small cabin in the rainforest, then went under the house and threw all our tools out onto the lawn. And this was in pitch blackness, and this powerful series of roars came out of the forest, unlike anything I'd ever heard before, like, yee, 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 booming call, and we wondered what on earth could do that. There was no animals that did that. Shortly afterwards, I think it was, that the head ranger came face to face with one. He was cutting through a fallen tree that had fallen across the walking track and came face to face with an animal unlike anything that anyone had ever seen before. He went into virtual shock, and they said it had a shiny black face, had a crested head like a sagittal crest. It was just like a gorilla to him. But he said it wasn't a gorilla. You can see it was a bit different. It was more bipedal. And that's the first time we had an idea of what this animal might look like. Because I was a natural skeptic, like, how could this animal exist without us knowing about it? You know, after 200 years of European settlement, but we've only got reports. That's the situation. The Yowie.
In this wild region of Queensland, one village claims to be the world capital of all things Yowie, Kilcoy.
Kilcoy is a beautiful little country town with a lot of character that is going back maybe 100 years. You know, the lifestyle there is still very visible and reminiscent of how it used to be when the early settlers came here.
We're almost exactly 100 kilometres from the middle of Brisbane.
John McCauley, a retired farmer, is passionate about the history of the region and the legend of Yowie.
First settled in the middle of the 1800s. Always been a grazing area, but also very big timber industry in the early days. There were many sawmills here, hardwood sawmills. It's a small country town, about 2,000 people. Not much different in size to when I was a boy. But that hotel on your left, the Exchange, it's been there since probably the 1930s. Other than that, many of the shops have been here since the very early days of Kilcoy. You'll notice there's a fair bit of traffic here, and that's because it's also the main highway through Kilcoy. There is no bypass, so all the traffic going from the coast has to come down this main street.
In 1979, 2 young Kilcoy residents claimed to have seen the Yowie while out in the forests. The story caught the attention of all of Australia.
There were 2 young high school kids camped in a creek out here, pig shooting, only about 4 kilometres from town here, quite close really, and they believed they heard and then saw a Yowie. One of them took a shot at it. He doesn't know whether he hit it, but it took off. And then they claimed that they could hear it. They could hear the footsteps thumping around, thumping away, and then they heard them behind them. They reckon they could hear this Yowie following them. They were scared, of course, and they ended up coming back to town in the middle of the night. And, you know, Yowie hunters from all over Australia descended on Kilcoy. It became big news. Was in all the magazines and papers and TV crews. So that's where the legend started.
The mayor at the time then decided to erect a statue to celebrate the unusual event, as well as to enshrine the Yowie as Kilcoy's official mascot.
It was cut out of a single tree and put up in the park in 1980 or thereabouts to work the legend for all it was worth. The last reported sighting of the Yowie was in the Sandy Creek area in December 1979, and it appears in Aboriginal folklore dating back thousands of years. When the white settlers arrived in Australia in 1788, the legends were already here amongst the Aborigines. The reports go right back to that date of white people actually seeing them. Since then, they've been seen all over the place, but there are sort of hot spots where more reports than usual come from, shall we say. There's a suburb of Sydney, the biggest city in Australia, called Yowie Bay, because that's where, in those very early times, was famous for its Yowie sightings.
But these sightings out here have been going on for hundreds of years. Up to 200 years, ever since first settlement. The Aboriginals always talked about the hairy man. Yeah, so it's a long history.
The Aboriginal people had a number of names for them depending upon their locality and their dialect, and one of the names was Yowie. The Aboriginal people talk about them as being an inhabitant of this land, but animals that are very secretive and very rare and very rarely encountered. The Aboriginal people say we walked with them, they were our cousins. We didn't harm them and they didn't harm us. And they're not to be frightened of, but they can be a bit frightening. But the fact that the Aboriginal people have names for these things is evidence that they knew about something that we don't know about.
Were the Aboriginals the first to see the Yowie? Teek St. Rode, a lover of Aboriginal culture, considers it necessary to understand their language to trace the origins of the Yowie.
They didn't really have that many words. We're trying to word things that were really never worded. They named everything after sounds. So depending on what the sound made or what the colours, depending on what they were, what they called it. So like, you hear children go, ooh, ah, but that's a very big picture, but it's only ooh-ah. But you know they've done something wrong, or owie, or something like that. So owie is another one. Owie, owie, I've hurt myself. Yowie. It's all toning, so.
According to him, the Yowie is more than just a terrifying monster. It's a spirit.
Everyone's had a spiritual experience. Everyone's had an experience in the bush where they felt something, but they've never been able to see it or communicate about it. That's so when you get that feeling that you're out of place or doing something that's not kosher or true, you get the hair stand up in your back, and you get that, you know, some people will fall into that space where they can't move their physical bodies. It's because you're breaking law. You've stepped into an energetical area that you were moving too fast into, and it stopped you to say, hey, don't come any closer. It's just the same if I walked into your house and didn't respect you and just come blurting through to your kitchen, open your fridge up and gone, oh, I want to take this, and you're sitting there looking at me walking through your house going, what are you doing here and who are you? It's the same sort of thing. That's what I know the Yowie to be. It's an ancestral part of ourselves that's sort of been lost in time, what they call it, lost in that space, that gap, that history can't put a time on. Nothing can put a time on.
That's the calls that I've heard them make.
But to Gary Opit, the Yowie is a carnivore, a terrifying flesh and blood creature.
So this is best of all lookouts at sunset. This is at Yowie time. This is the time encounters have occurred. Queensland, in many localities, is very undisturbed. It's subtropical, and so you've got a better higher rainfall, and so you've got more abundant insects, and the animals that prey on the insects, bandicoots, and the small kangaroos called paddymellons that graze on the rainforest leaves, apparently all provide food for these Yowies. They don't live in large numbers. We imagine they're only in small family groups, and we don't even know how many families there may be of them, but enough to survive and continue to increase. But of course, we don't have evidence, physical evidence, that this animal actually exists, purely anecdotal evidence. We go entirely on the stories that people tell us, but the stories are so similar. They're not telling us so that they can become famous or wealthy or anything, because most people don't believe them. It's a bizarre experience coming across some large, hairy, ape-like, yeti-like animal.
Ray Doherty and Ron Quinton make their way into the Springbrook National Park in Queensland on the hunt for the Yowie.
So we're heading to a walking track in the Maples State Forest. This is where we had an experience a couple of months back, where we walked inside and we believe we got surrounded by 4 of them. They were vocalising, throwing rocks, breaking branches, a real classic, you know, male demonstration of power and authority. Here it is here on the right. We have a theory about what these creatures are. We believe that they're an undiscovered great ape, an uncharted great ape. These things are far smarter than a gorilla or an orangutan or a chimpanzee, but they live in a very similar way. We think that they're largely nocturnal. We know that their smell's good because we also know that they'll see you before you even know they're there. And they don't see very well in direct sunlight. Fingers crossed. You never know with these things. They like corn. We found they like sweet corn. So we're going to take a few pieces in with us and leave it, throw them around, leave them in places and see if it helps us. We'll just head in.
The alleged habitat of the Yowie is both beautiful and potentially lethal. It's home to deadly creatures like the venomous Sydney funnel web spider. Rural Australia is also home to 8 of the 10 most dangerous snake species in the world. This is not a place for the inexperienced.
It's grown a lot more since we were here last. It's really densed out. It's probably going to favour them a lot, so we'll see how we get on. This is about as far as we got last time. Here we heard them walking, and when we got up to that corner is where they had us. One up there, one out there, one down there, and one over there. Look at this perfect rainforest canopy, man. It's just, people be walking through here unaware, and they'll just be living here, observing. And if they're anywhere, they're either down there watching us, or they're up here. Hang on. Dead up, straight up here in the middle.
Yeah, I can see.
You can see it? Might be something, might be nothing. But it's just leaves and stuff. We're looking for a lot of convergent behaviour between the African apes and what this thing is, and we have found traits of chimp, we've found traits of orangutan, we've found traits of gorillas in all the activity, and you know, of course, tree climbing is one of all of them. But we look for some of the really dark patches and trees and unusual congregations of leaves and branches, because what we find with them, they will, like the others, they'll construct a nest and where they can see everyone and everything approaching. Here, as you can see, there's millions of places where they can hide.
For Ray, the Yowie is a member of an as-yet-undiscovered species of monkey, a theory dismissed by many cryptozoologists.
Australia, New Zealand, Antarctica, Africa, South America, it was all one continent. This is in the times of the dinosaurs. We've never reached East Asia, so we don't have any Asian animals here. So there's no apes at all, no apes whatsoever.
Shh, just quietly, stay on the dirt.
You hear that down there then?
You hear that? Hang on, shh, shh. From what primatology tells us, they're non-threatening noises, and they're the noises that we've observed females of them making. We believe that the loud calls that everyone does throughout the world are alarm calls, we think. Grab a piece of corn, and hopefully if they're watching us and they see it, then they might recognise it from when we last left it here. See if anything moves towards it. So far, no luck. So if they're there, they're staying very quiet. Well, they're not here. So keep pushing on a little bit further, yeah?
Attempting to attract the Yowie with plant food is futile, according to Gary Opid. He believes fresh meat is more likely to pique its appetite.
If these Yowies exist, and they appear to exist, it doesn't seem to be a vegetarian like a gorilla. Carnivores are naturally energy savers. So like lions and normal predators, leopards and tigers, they'll sleep for 20 hours a day. They might be active for 4. So this animal is liable to behave in exactly the same way, which is why they're not often seen. People have found what looks like a small teepee where a bunch of trees have been arched together, and then inside will be all feathers or fur from a plucked cat, as if something was sitting in this natural bush hide, grabbed something and torn it, plucked it, and then presumably taken it off and eaten it.
Unusual sound, you hear that? Like a cat call. Hey? I've never heard it before in my life either. I don't know what it is. It sounds like something dying. Right, something up there. It's making noises, I can hear it. Like sound like an underarm rock. Don't anyone move.
Ray Doherty and Ron Quinton continue their search for the enigmatic Yowie.
Something is here, something's around us. That much I know, because I heard the big thud up there and the big rock. Oh, looks like something's been down there. Now look at here.
Somebody's snapped it off.
It's covered in mud, it's been broken off and
pulled out of it.
And it's been used to dig. Is there any... Oh yeah, you can see something in here, impression. Something's been clawing all over. There's probably a kid while the adult dug. It's reasonable to assume that something's been here digging away and there's a trail leading off that whatever it was left in a fairly decent hurry.
But 100 kilometers or 62 miles away at the University of Brisbane, the scientist Ross Balch believes Ray and Don may be searching for the monster forever.
I'm Ross Balch. I'm the president of the Brisbane Skeptic Society. So I'm actually a biologist. Science and research is really my passion, and I guess it helps me as a skeptic as well, because the scientific method is the core of everything that we do. I've come across things that people can't immediately explain, but I don't think I've ever come across anything that's unexplainable. Sometimes you just have to say, I don't know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something weird. Well, the Yowie is a very interesting character or myth. I know it comes from ancient Aboriginal cultures originally, but sightings of the Yowie actually decreased for a long time, and it wasn't until the 70s where sightings picked up again, and I think really it became another cultural phenomenon. You know, it became one of those stories that Australians like to hear about. I think the more culturally prevalent something is, the more likely people are to attribute that idea to something that they can't explain. If you're primed to want to see a Yowie, and you see something in the bushes that you can't explain, your brain might be much more likely to morph it into something that to you looks like a Yowie than, say, to me as a skeptic would. I think most people just like the idea of being able to find one and being the first, you know, the first to have the evidence that everyone's so desperate to find. I think that's what makes it such a good story in a way, because it's undiscovered still. But unfortunately, without any evidence, it seems unlikely to me that the Yowie's out there.
But doubts about the monster's existence aren't slowing down Ray and Don. They intend to continue their quest at all costs.
See, look here, Ron. Look here. This could be water run. You can see here, like if it was water run, it would go straight over the edge. I don't think it's water, because water would just come over, right, and go straight down there. But this has gone on an angle on purpose. Probably a few days old, but you can see something has gone down in through there and into the ferns, deeper into that rainforest gully. This could be a human trail, but as you can see how dense the jungle and the mountains are here, I don't know why people would be walking down. So that's a sign that something's gone down there. So we'll leave a few little gifts as we go, so they don't think we're all bad in the open. So we'll head back out and even just where we went's a bit of a walk, isn't it? You know, we know that from previously there's a couple up on the hill and there's a couple down in the valley, and I think there were a couple watching us today. Well, did you hear those footsteps? Yeah, definitely heard a rock that landed, a big rock, boom, very close, and that rock, that was a rock, a big rock that was thrown that I heard, and I definitely think something was certainly watching us for sure. There's a couple of trails that we saw that went off the main trail. The first instance you would say rain runoff, but remember it hasn't rained up here for a few months, and that looked like it was made within the last week or two maybe, but looked like something human sized had gone down there. So if they are a basic animal but just smarter than a gorilla and everything, what are they driven by? They're driven by shelter, water, for food, and the need to reproduce. So that's how we've got to track them. I mean, I feel like there was something with us, but at the end of the day, without a visual confirmation and a good, decent vocal, who knows?
Since the 1970s, Gary Opit has had several meetings with the terrifying Yowie. The most recent took place here, in the forests of Springbrook.
So I was walking down this track. It was around about this time of night. It was very quiet and still, and I could hear a very large animal pushing its way through the vegetation around about 40 or 50 metres in. And then there was a loud crack, like that. And then another crack, and then another crack. This continued for 3 or 4 minutes, and I was looking with my binoculars. I just got glimpses of something covered in what looked like brown hair and was standing maybe my height. It was difficult to discern the height. Might have been 1.5 metres, might have been more. And then it went quiet. I then pushed my way into the forest, but it must have moved off very quietly, and I wasn't able to find anything at all. The only animal that we know of that was so large and could sneak away without making a sound, of course, is the Yowie.
But for Ross Balch, Gary Opit's experiences have a very simple explanation.
I think humans have a nature of humanizing things that they see. There's a psychological effect called pareidolia, and pareidolia is the process by which the brain essentially takes things which are random and assigns meaning to them. And the human brain's very good at morphing things you can't quite distinguish into very human-looking creatures. And it seems to me it's much more likely to be a possum based on the behavior of the creature than a Yowie, for instance. You know, a possum is a branch dweller, and it could look like the head of a bigger creature when in fact it's just a smaller creature at a height which seems like it's the correct place for something else. If you saw that out of the corner of your eye, the rustle of the bushes, you might easily mistake that for a very human-like creature.
One theory posits that the Yowie is a descendant of the Neanderthals.
Darwin's theory of evolution was only a theory, a common, widely accepted theory, but there also is the missing link. Maybe these things are it.
So the Yowie, it looks very much like a large ape-like creature. It's almost like a Neanderthal, like a hairy Neanderthal.
And we believe that they came here through the 2 ice ages when the water levels of the Torres Strait were so low you could almost walk across.
Another hypothesis suggests that the Yowie is a survivor of the era of the Australian megafauna, which dates from 20 to 50,000 years ago.
It could be one of our prehistoric marsupials.
Australia wasn't covered in snow. Australia was a tropical rainforest that was in drought, and during that time we had a thing called megafauna, which was basically supersized plants, animals.
We had giant koalas that were as big as hippopotamuses and rhinoceroses.
Marsupials today that are the size of a cat, that were as big as a car.
There are some Aboriginal cave paintings of these animals, and we know these animals from their fossils, from their skeletons found in caves.
You have these megafaunas, and if this creature is a remnant of that, you can try to understand them and study them more.
No one really is sure because we don't have any physical evidence that they actually exist.
In Australia, we know very well the history of primates in this country. In fact, there's only one that we know of, and that is, of course, humans. By the time humans reached Australia, humans had already evolved into the form that we see today. And of course, the Aboriginal people have been here for a long time. And it seems unlikely, because we don't have any evidence to the contrary, that any other type of hominid species has been to Australia. For another one to have existed here for as long as a Yowie would have had to, again, we would have found fossils, bones, some kind of evidence that the existence of the Yowie was indeed true.
They leave almost no impression of themselves. Occasional footprints, and they look like very large human footprints, very primate-like.
The Yowie itself isn't amazingly far-fetched in terms of the physiology. You know, you only have to look at some of the early humans, the way that they had a lot of hair, but the stance of the Yowie doesn't make as much sense. Early hominids were very crouched, they weren't as upright as humans, and looking at the size of its feet, you know, based on the cast that people say they have,
I have with me an actual footprint of the Yowie, and you can see by my hand, quite an amazing animal.
You know, that evidence doesn't correlate with the other characteristics which it would have to have, unfortunately. So it doesn't make much sense biologically, that the body plan doesn't really make much sense. And that's another reason why I find it hard to believe that the Yowie is out there somewhere.
It's not as if you've only had one report from one person. I get other photographs and reports from other people. I've had drawings that people have done for me of what they've seen, and it's always the same animal.
An anecdote is interesting, and it's certainly a basis for more study, but an anecdote isn't evidence.
Mostly people get the shock of their life, and it makes a major impact on them because suddenly they've encountered something that they never imagined existed.
But a story is just a story until it's confirmed by something that can't be morphed and shaped and changed over successive iterations of remembering something.
Ray Doherty will continue his search for the Yowie, even though he believes he has proof to confound even the most ardent skeptic.
We photograph anomalous shapes, anomalous colours, and we have found on some of them a creature of some kind that doesn't fit our flora and fauna records sitting in a tree. We've got one photo which you can clearly see. You can see a chest, you can see an arm, and you can see what looks like a head.
None of those are good enough to make a positive identification. There's always some kind of issue. It's blurry, or it could easily be another animal. I think if any of them were a bit less blurry or unambiguous, it would still be hard to call that conclusive proof without actually having a physical specimen. The idea of a Yowie existing in nature it's quite a remote possibility, really, because of genetics and inbreeding. If you have a population less than around 50 to 100, it's almost impossible, especially for a creature as big as a Yowie is purported to be able to continue to breed and sustain a population. And I think, given the numbers it would take over such a large area as Australia, we would definitely have found solid evidence by now if the Yowie did exist.
Still, a majority of Australians doubt that a real monster wanders freely in their tropical forests.
See the little boy?
But the legend amuses people and has become part of the local folklore.
It's the local football team of the Yowies, and they play on the Yowie fields over here. That scares the opposition. The town and the council and tourism and rode on the legend of the Yowie, I guess. And where we're sitting now is Yowie Park. They hold the markets here every couple of weeks. Well, as you can see, people bring their wares along, some of them homemade, everything around the place. You can buy Yowie bread and Yowie burgers and Yowie everything.
Yowie Coffee was established back in 2005. It's a good spot. I just wanted to get out of the hustle and bustle of Brisbane, you know, and what better place than Kilcoy here in Queensland to do that. Kilcoy is almost the capital of the Yowie country, I believe. Something that tourists are attracted to, you know. Some of them even come out here to look for the Yowie. And whether you believe it or not, you know, it's a great story.
Is the Yowie more myth than monster? There are still those who want to believe.
I think there's some type of off-breed of the gorilla, personally, but I don't know. A lot of people think they're supernatural. They just appear and disappear.
Yeah, oh, you know them, you know when they're there. Hairs stand up on your back, man.
It's a truly wonderful thing because we may have an unknown animal.
You know, and they're not nuts, these people. They're seeing something. And it's not just a shadow in the bush.
Well, I've seen one several times, but I hope to see one close up and try to build a relationship with something that's not human or partly human. We know it is partly human.
I mean, it could be an Australian man, Homo australiensis.
You can go so far with belief and faith and trust, I guess, but a bit of physical evidence. A handful of hair would be good.
Everyone's fascinated by the past. We all wish we could have a time machine. If the Yowie was out there, it would almost be as good as having one. It would tell us something about where we've come from and also possibly where we're going.
And until we actually get one in the flesh, I don't think anyone's going to know.
Now, you don't believe in them. I'll take you up there and leave you in the scrub at night on your own and see if you don't believe in the morning.
In the heart of Pennsylvania, a strange creature has been seen over the countryside and forests.
We may be dealing with maybe a possible flying creature. We don't know.
Around here, they call it the Thunderbird.
I wouldn't want to be in his food chain.
We just keep going out there and we keep trying to find those pieces of the puzzle that are missing.
And they are somewhere, and they will be found.
Pennsylvania, USA, a state rich in history. The Philadelphia metropolitan area is considered the birthplace of American democracy. It's also famous for its beautiful natural surroundings and for once being the center of America's steel industry. Today, its rural areas seem frozen in time, small enclaves forgotten to history. But this state has a well-kept secret. Here, locals are passionate about all things paranormal. And it is said that sometimes, at dusk, strange creatures take to the skies.
I'm Joe Mayer, from South Greensburg. I'm a stonemason. It was just about dark. The sky still had light in it, but it was real close to turning dark, late dusk. And it just came out of nowhere. I mean, it made no noise except the swish of the wings I heard. And that was when I looked up, it was just like this. I mean, it just never looked at us or anything. It just was on a mission, I guess, heading somewhere to feed. We were out here. My wife, Ryan, and our neighbor were sitting right there. I was over the fire here, flipping the ribs. And I heard flapping behind me. It sounded like a whoosh sound of a wing. And I turned around and looked, and up in the sky behind me was a huge bird. It was right there. It was right there. I watched this wing. I heard the wing coming down as I turned around, and it went straight down that road. Right where the ditch is in the tree up there. It probably cleared that tree 20 feet. Its second wing flap was about where that telephone pole was. The next one was about halfway down that road, and then it was gone. It was that fast. It was like 10 seconds, maybe 12 seconds, and it was gone. What was that? I don't know. And I jumped in on the internet after that, and we were looking up birds. And we seen nothing that looked like it. Yeah, nothing. Closest thing to that was, in color-wise, was like a golden eagle, which is a darker brown. But it was, I've seen eagles. That wasn't an eagle. It was just a huge bird.
Mary is passionate about anything paranormal. She knows all of the Thunderbird stories.
I've talked to many people who have actually had encounters of various kinds. People who have seen it flying, people who have seen it, people who have complained that the fish in their pond have all disappeared because the Thunderbird has eaten them. Friends that have had little dogs taken from a fenced-in yard at night. So yeah, I know some Thunderbird stuff.
For Mary, monsters aren't just a passion, they're a job.
This is my store. It's a gift shop. It's got all kinds of fun stuff in it. We like monsters. Well, right now we're studying Thunderbirds because the Thunderbird is well known around here for doing some very strange things. Okay, Thunderbirds, dream catchers, cars with Thunderbird feathers on them. Come on, Bigfoot. You can actually have your picture taken with Bigfoot. This is a picture of an Indian teepee with a Thunderbird. You can see what they were seeing. And it wasn't a heron, and it wasn't an eagle, and it wasn't an owl. It was something else. I think it's a small segment of the population that really finds them interesting, wants to know more, wants to follow up on them, wants to look for themselves to see, looking around to see if they can see something. So I'd say a small part of our population, but a serious one, are keeping track of what goes on.
South Greensburg, a small town of 2,000 inhabitants, has experienced the most Thunderbird reports. In this small, tightly knit community, news of the paranormal spreads like wildfire.
I'm Betty Dobies, mayor of South Greensburg. It's just a friendly town. They look out for each other. You know what I mean? It's like a knitted community where everybody looks out for each other. We don't bother each other, but if there's a problem, everybody comes in and helps solve that problem or help you out in any way they can. It's just that kind of communities that we have here. It would have a big wingspan that people have seen as far as, Acme and all around the area. Somebody's seen it up on 819. A friend of mine's seen it up in Acme where they have a pond. But as far as being a Thunderbird or not, I can't answer that. But there are sightings of a big bird, and that's what it is.
Mike is one of those who saw the disturbing, elusive creature.
It was September 2001, and I was standing on the porch right of my old house, watching the traffic go by. It was on a major highway, 119, in Greensburg, and caught my attention was a noise it sounded like flags flapping in a thunderstorm, and I looked up and I thought I saw a plane. I did a double take, like a small plane, and here it was a bird. Its wingspan was stretched out. It might have been 50 feet up in the air, but I could tell that the wings would stretch almost 3 lanes of a 4-lane highway. And it inspired me to paint this.
This is Beyond the Edge Radio. Nervous? Scared? Don't be afraid. The wait will be over soon. Sit down, strap in, and hold on tight.
Let's go live in 5, 4, 3.
Hey, good evening and welcome to another edition of Beyond the Edge Radio. We are live here on the ParaX Radio Network and Planet Paranormal, 803 here on the East Coast, and it is Sunday.
Eric Altman spends all his free time chasing monsters. He would love to add the Thunderbird to his trophy case.
People describe the Thunderbird as a large bird, usually black in color from the beak to the talons. Sometimes it's covered in feathers, sometimes not, but usually when it's covered in feathers, as I said, it's black. Sometimes they describe a white ring around its neck, other times no. When it's not covered with feathers, they usually describe it having like a membrane, like a reptilian membrane, or like a leathery type of skin to it. And the wingspan, it ranges in size from 8 foot, and I've heard reports as much as 20 foot in length. A very large, large bird.
We looked on the internet to find out what it could be, and we kept running into Stan Gordon's name, so I called him up and put a report in, and he came down and interviewed me over and asked me to draw a picture of it.
In Pennsylvania, when the supernatural is spotted, Stan Gordon is called to the rescue. He has carefully documented all the evidence on the Thunderbird.
My name is Stan Gordon. I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. I've been researching, investigating strange and unusual happenings here in Pennsylvania since, actually, I started in 1959 when I was 10 years old. The main thing I do is gather information, witnesses call me, on sightings either by way of email or my hotline, which has been available to the public since 1969. And I interview people, try to figure out what they saw. Cases that warranted, we try to go out and do first-hand investigations. Many of the phenomena I investigate, whether it be strange creatures or UFOs, many of these things, as we track them down, we can find an explanation for them. Many of these things are misidentifications. We can figure out what the people see. But year after year, people continue to report these encounters with something that, as of yet, we don't have the answers for.
Pennsylvania is fertile ground for Eric Altman and Stan Gordon. It is said that monster sightings are more common here than in any other state in the country.
Historically, Pennsylvania has always been active with a history of strange phenomena. From accounts from the Native Americans to articles in newspapers of the 1800s to the present, people see things year after year throughout the state of Pennsylvania.
I'm not sure why this area has such a history of strange phenomenon. I really don't know, but it just does. Reports back from the 50s onward. Some of the more recent ones have taken place in the 90s through the 2000s. Most recent was in 2013. But they go back as far back as the 50s. And we're aware of across the nation, there have been reports dating back to the 1800s.
Many of the reports initially appear to be strange and unusual, but when you go out and do the investigation, the majority are found to be either natural or man-made in origin. It's very hard, for example, when you see an aircraft in the sky or a bird, to get an idea of the actual altitude and size. We've had instances of these huge birds, these Thunderbird reports, where they are also at very, very close range, and there was a way that they were able to measure and get a pretty good idea of the wingspan of those very large flying creatures. Over the years, I've gathered a lot of information, interviewed hundreds and hundreds of witnesses, gathered various types of physical evidence, saw different patterns to various phenomena. So I'm convinced that there's phenomena out there that we don't have an explanation for.
But where could this giant bird come from? According to witnesses, the creature could be millions of years old.
Some of the reports describe something as very large, but with leathery skin. They look like a giant bats. And then other witnesses that come forward who have seen some of these huge flying creatures at pretty close range, and reluctantly they tell me that they look like something that was prehistoric.
We may be dealing with maybe a pterodon or a pterosaur, an extinct, possible flying creature. We don't know.
And this is one of those mysteries with so many of these strange creature reports, whether we're dealing with Thunderbirds or Bigfoot, or we get Black Panther sightings in the area, other types of strange creatures. And it's not only in Pennsylvania, but the question always comes up, where do they come from and where do they go?
Really startling to see something that large. But I also heard that they're harbingers of doom.
Lou DeRose is a lawyer and amateur historian. For this citizen of South Greensburg, it's not surprising that monster stories have a strong resonance here.
I'm originally from the area. I was born just north of Greensburg, and I've been here 45 years. I'm involved in the Westmoreland County Historical Society. I'm the past chair of that group. I've written a book about the history of Greensburg. I've written some other chapters about local history and things like that. Well, we're good, adventurous stock. The Scotch-Irish were adventurous and hardworking and eager to take on new challenges, and I think their descendants and all of us just sort of adopted that philosophy. Oh, this is interesting. What happened here? What, a Bigfoot sighting? Let's go find that guy. A UFO sighting? Let's go out and sit out in the woods for, 40 years and see if there's another one. I think it's terrific.
The belief in this mythical bird is nothing new for the First Nations of Pennsylvania.
My name is Christian Allen. My native name is Kalista Ndakwa. I'm of mixed heritage, but I'm a descendant of the Sewickley Sept of the Shawnee. For my people, the Thunderbird is the gatekeeper of heaven. It is something that watches over us. When it's here, it's flesh and blood. It's an animal, but it has the capability to disappear. I think what they saw would be what it would look like. For us, it would resemble a falcon in shape. It would be very, very large. It would be following the same paths, which both of the eyewitnesses, it was following the same path. So I think as far as their eyewitness report, it doesn't differ from what my people would believe that you would see.
The sightings all seem to converge on the same place, the forest of Chestnut Ridge, a stone's throw from South Greensburg.
One of the most interesting areas in the country is the Chestnut Ridge. The Chestnut Ridge is a 100-mile-long mountain range that runs from Preston County, West Virginia, through Westmoreland, Fayette, Indiana County in southwest Pennsylvania. It is one of the most active areas year after year for Thunderbird reports. And for whatever reason, that area over around Derry in Westmoreland County, along the base of the ridge, is very, very active. In this immediate area, again, locally over the years, I've heard people talking about describing to me this loud whoosh or swooshing sound. They gave an impression of something big and flying close by, but they didn't see what was causing the sound. What's interesting is it's all within a couple of miles, maybe not even that far.
Yeah, I was standing right here on the porch, and the bird flew out from these woods over here, right over the hillside, and it lingered above the traffic, its wings out, and it flew up over into these trees here, and there used to be a big dead tree on that hillside, and that's where it landed.
It happened. You know, you can tell me you didn't see it. So I know what I saw, and I know what my buddy saw, and I know what my wife saw. And that's just how it is. It's a big bird, and not from Sesame Street either.
It has a great area for any kind of animal to live and breed and have no problem staying hidden from man, because it's such a wild area. A lot of forested cover, water area, a lot of good food source. So it's a great area for any kind of animal to really hide out and stay in and not really be bothered by.
But that bird, I wouldn't want to corner that bird. I wouldn't want to be in his food chain.
Return to the scene, observe the skies, and study the creature's habitat. These are the standard methods of Eric Altman.
What we try to do as researchers, if an eyewitness has a sighting at a specific location, we try to go to that location and we try to search the area to see if there might be physical evidence, feathers or maybe droppings or something that can show us that there was an animal in that area. I followed up on these reports over the years, and I believe that the eyewitnesses are seeing something. I don't know what they're seeing. Of course, I wasn't there to validate what they saw, but they're seeing something that they can't identify, and that's what I'm trying to find out. It's a challenge, but it's what makes it interesting is just having that thrill of the chase to get out there and try to find out.
Eric Altman can count on followers to accompany him in his research.
I met Eric at a conference, actually. He was speaking about Bigfoot. I sat to listen to it because I really wasn't aware at that time of all the different sightings right in my own backyard. We quickly became good friends because he's open-minded and he likes adventures, and I'm the same way. And now I co-host on BTE Radio with him. And we're at a lot of events together. Just a great guy. Stories about the Thunderbirds over the past decade, 2001 to, I believe, in May 2014, there's been sightings off and on. Everyone keeps describing the same type of creature, a bird with about a 20-foot wingspan, black and brown in color. It always seems to be the same kind of a story. Someone's out alone walking or riding a motorcycle. There's no other witnesses but the one account. I am a skeptic. I've never personally had somebody tell me an account of seeing the Thunderbirds, but I've read a lot of different stories, and I came down here to Greensburg to see for myself what the area is all about. I want to have the proof before I make a decision on what's being seen and told about. I believe they're seeing something, but without me being there and just getting bits and pieces, I can't say for sure what it is.
Before entering Chestnut Ridge, Altman motivates his troops and organizes the hunt for the Thunderbird.
Basically what we're going to do is try to come up with an area where there have been a lot of sightings at and check that area out, see if we can find anything. And it seems like the best area to go to would be what makes sense, South Greensburg, because that's where Joe's had his sighting at. And what Christian was explaining is where a lot of the burial mounds seem to be, and there have been sightings in the last decade. So that might be our best bet. People think that this is all populated area. They think that, you know, it's all urban area, suburban area, and there's no way big animals could hide out.
Oh, you go down to Slickville, it's all mines.
Yeah.
Slickville, there's mines everywhere down there, open mines everywhere down there.
But for today's outing, we're taking some very basic, simple equipment with us. A pair of binoculars, so we can keep an eye on the trees and the sky in case we do see something. A GPS, so we can map our coordinates. If we want to return to that area, we'll know where, if we did find anything. And of course, the 16-foot tape measure, so if we do find anything, we can document what we do find as far as evidence. And if we do need to return to the area, we can return with a DNA kit and collect whatever physical evidence we can collect. Well, of course, we want to document it on video camera and hopefully get some pictures of it. And
probably get a picture of me running and screaming.
We get the gear packed up and we'll be ready to roll.
I am scared, but it still drives me out in the forest to look for things.
Sneaking along the ridges, looking for sign, basically. Look for feeding area, bones, anything like that. There's a couple of different ways to go in down here. If you cut straight down this road and swing to the left, that'll take you right to the wetlands. You can cut up the trail to the ridge and go out that way and down too.
For Christian Allen, there is no doubt that they are on the very edge of the Thunderbird's habitat.
As far as what we look for today, we were basically hunting a flesh and blood creature. And this is a place where a lot of people don't even know it's here. And it has a lot of food and cover for such a creature to exist.
But Eric Altman and his friends are not the only ones interested in the winged creature.
My name is Brian Shima. I'm the Conservation Director for the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. The organization was founded in 1916. The mission of the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania is to educate and connect people to the natural world. I oversee much of our operations, daily operations. I oversee all of our conservation work, and I am the resident bird expert. Pennsylvania, as you know, there's a lot of diverse habitats in Pennsylvania. We actually have a lot of flowing water, actually more miles of stream than any other state in the lower 48 states. A lot of individual interesting habitats exist within Pennsylvania. Largest bird in Pennsylvania is bald eagle. Their wing spread is right around between 6 and 6.5 feet. You know, they have the iconic white head and white tail when they're mature. When they're immature, the bird's all brown. So bald eagles are actually confused with a lot of other species, but it is the largest bird that we have in Pennsylvania. We're actually also a mixing zone for when speaking specifically of birds. We have a number of northerly breeding birds that exist in Pennsylvania, as well as a number of southerly breeding birds in Pennsylvania. So we're kind of a mixing zone for two different groups of birds that prefer different latitudes.
We try to piece together the puzzle, so to speak. We want to see if there's more information out there than just that eyewitness story. And we want to try to find out what they saw too. If something like that's still around, it'd be the find of a century.
No person has been injured or killed by a Thunderbird in Pennsylvania. And despite its intimidating size, we shouldn't fear it. So says Christian Allen, at least.
Like I said, it's an omen. It's a good omen. It means you're being taken care of. It's not something to be frightened of. They also come with storms. If there's a storm coming, like a really bad storm, you'll see them. They're warning you. Batten hatches, it's coming. They come out of water, which is another good thing because they can always come out of clean water, and we all need that. So it could be something to lead you to water. As you can see, it's clean. This water's, all you need is a few drops of bleach and to boil it and you can drink it. Yeah, you can see there's some fish there.
Yeah. Creek chubs.
Actually, we would hope to, if we were being noisy, to flush something out. Maybe startle something that it would take off. You never know. Just looking. You would think in one of the higher up trees, like the tree out there, they would find a larger, flatter tree and put a nest up in that area there, but it's anybody's guess. We don't even know if they nest in trees.
But according to Brian Shima, the searches conducted by Eric Altman are likely to be unsuccessful.
If that bird existed in a populated area, I think everyone would agree that someone like me would know about it overnight. The sightings would come to our organization. We are the bird experts in Western Pennsylvania. We are the bird conservation organization for Western Pennsylvania.
And where we saw it, it was kind of in line, flying in line with the trail, but about 100 yards to the left, right down the road. And that was pretty neat. But I mean, the fact that you saw one right up the road, and then there was another one seen right up the road there, that's kind of too much of a coincidence in the same area for not to be something to it.
People that see what they think might be a Thunderbird could very well be the perspective that they're viewing from. It could be a very large bird. You know, it could be a red-tailed hawk. It could be a bald eagle. It could be a golden eagle. Each of these being large birds. But when looking at it from a certain perspective, they might not have a way of judging how large that bird actually is.
I mean, any kind of raptor, its diet's protein. And
yeah.
That's here.
Yeah.
See anything?
No. That's all such heavy swamp in there. I mean, you can't get through there.
I tell you, I feel a little uneasy back here. Just, I don't know. It's pretty. I love nature, but there's just, I don't know.
Spooky.
Something here. I feel spooky.
Let's see what we got here.
It's a myth. You know, it's scientifically speaking, there have been no records, no documentation whatsoever of a bird such as that. There is really a lot of evidence that shows that it would be basically impossible for a bird like that to exist. If the Thunderbird were to exist, there would need to be a large enough population to sustain genetic diversity, which means many of us would be seeing Thunderbirds on a daily basis. Without that genetic diversity, that species would quickly, the diversity would deteriorate and the species would simply not exist.
Christian Allen doesn't have any elaborate theories. For him, the Thunderbird is an ancestral belief.
This is a recreation of, I hate to say this, but it's similar to like a rosary, so that you can remember your prayers. And these are things that you're thankful for, like this means family. And these symbols here that look like keyholes are Thunderbirds, the Thunderers that are the guardians of heaven. It's very important to our culture and it's something that we today keep alive, but we believe it exists. Whether it's flesh and blood or from the other realm, as these sticks would suggest, we believe it's possible that you can see it, and you're going to continue to see it. And like I said, it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Do we know where he is?
That's he went in there.
Heavy back here.
Doe, fawn.
Oh, are you okay? Yeah, see, that's why I quit following you, right there.
I look for hair, I look for feathers, everything back. I didn't see anything like that. You know, so figured if there's going to be anything, it'd be around the greenbrier, the jag bushes. You know, I'd grab hair, grab feather, whatever. I didn't see anything like that. There's really no area that they could build a nest off the ground back there either. There's some buffalo grass growing back there in some of the openings. It was all laid flat in a swirl like this. And I showed her one right up here. But as I got in further, I found 3 different spots like that in there. Where either it's you would think a herd of deer, 4 or 5 deer maybe bedding together, but usually you'll see the individual pockets where the deer are laying, you know, in the grass, but I didn't see that. I just saw a whole area. So that's strange.
The ultimate goal of cryptozoologists is to confound science, to discover the unexplainable. And every little clue that brings them closer to that goal is worth evaluating.
This is an owl?
Looks like an owl.
I find feathers every time I walk, and sometimes, like, they'll be laying on my car seat, like, that shouldn't be. Oh.
Some tribes see the owl as an omen that someone in your family's going to pass. My tribe's a little different. To us, it was a warbird.
Okay.
And by this, they actually kept owls as pets. Naturally, if you're going to go to war against someone who's definitely afraid of owls, you're going to have an owl with you.
Okay.
So, a mile and a half long, I'd say.
Yeah, comes all the way out to 4 quarters. Larger. This little swamp here.
Today we got unlucky. Inconclusive. We got to look at some great terrain, great area, a great water source and food source, and sure could probably hide a large bird of that size without anybody being around to see it. Are we going to find it from just a walk out in the woods? No. It probably is going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of manpower, and just the right place at the right time. And we might get lucky, but it's just the luck of the draw, getting out there and doing it.
You can hunt turkeys because they're usually on the ground, but to hunt a large falcon-shaped bird, you have to follow that animal, know its habits. It would take forever, I think, just to come out and see one. I'm not going to bet that you are.
So what did Joe and the dozens of other witnesses see? Did they just make the whole thing up?
I think that there are rational explanations to what people are seeing. And I think that, you know, through some education and through some awareness, we might be able to get to the bottom of what it is these people are seeing and how they're confusing the size of these birds with something that we see on a daily basis, like large hawks or large eagles. I think that the humans are curious. And I think that, you know, with technology, certainly the internet, if someone were to Google extremely large bird, there is a lot of information out there about various myths or real facts. I think that the human curiosity is oftentimes something that may lead people down the road of myths.
For his part, Stan Gordon believes that the abundance of evidence confirms that this is not just a myth. the Thunderbird really does haunt the skies of Pennsylvania.
I mean, I've been taking calls from the public on these sightings since 1969. So a lot of people know that there's a place they can report sightings to. I had founded and directed 3 volunteer research groups that started in 1970 and continued to 1993 that were very, very active throughout the state of Pennsylvania. We had a lot of scientists and engineers and research people, former military intelligence people, law enforcement officers who were part of our volunteer group. So we had trained people who were going out there to look into these mysteries. And it was our goal to try to investigate these cases, to try to find an explanation, which in many cases we did. But year after year, these incidents continue to occur, and not every case can be so easily dismissed.
Although sightings of the Thunderbird are concentrated in the South Greensburg area, there are still many skeptics here.
I mean, I've seen some large birds in the area, but nothing super large to where it's a supernatural bird. Yeah, it's almost as bad as the Mothman. That's ridiculous to me, the Mothman. Really?
And the absence of any hard evidence doesn't help Eric Altman's cause.
No photographs, no video, there's no evidence. And that's what, I can see the skeptic's argument, you know, where's the proof? Where's the photographs? Where's the video? We don't have any. And I have to agree with the skeptics. Why aren't people whipping out their cell phone cameras? Everybody has one. You know, everybody has, you know, the access to a camera on the cell phone or video. Why aren't people taking pictures?
But, I mean, we all had cameras. My camera was sitting right here, our phone cameras. They all had their phone in their hands right there, and there it was, and we didn't take a picture. Stupidity. We were kind of like just watching it, yeah? Didn't think of it.
People seeing something, yeah, I believe maybe they're seeing a bird of some sort. It definitely is not a Thunderbird. There's no such thing. It just doesn't sound right, just doesn't make sense. I'd have to see it. You'd have to catch one or kill one or something for me to believe it.
You have to have physical evidence to prove the animal exists. Eyewitness testimony just doesn't cut it. So Doug's right, you have to have physical evidence.
I've told Eric over the year, we've argued, I said if I'm out in the woods and I'm hunting, I see Bigfoot or I see something that resembles it, I'm gonna shoot it. It's either I wanna be a hero or people are gonna hate me. So.
And they'll probably hate him. And with the Thunderbird, he's right. People are seeing something, what it is, who knows? But what they're describing doesn't fit any of the known animals or any known birds that are around this area. It's much too large.
I do believe in UFOs. Yes, I believe that there's creatures from other planets, because I think it would be absurd to believe that we're the only life in the universe. And you know, with the way it is today, they're discovering planet after planet. So there has to be life somewhere else. Like Area 51, do I think?
Okay, well, let me ask you this question then. If you believe in Area 51 has UFOs and aliens there, but you've never seen them, why don't you believe in Bigfoot or Thunderbird? You've never seen those.
Well, because for one, Bigfoot, you're always out there. People have cameras. The thing cannot be that elusive.
You don't typically see a Bigfoot walking down the street or a Thunderbird flying through the air. It's not something that happens every day, so it's not accepted by science, it's not accepted by the general public, so you must be crazy. So people don't want to talk about stuff like that. So they're very reluctant to report or share their experiences.
So many of these people were people who didn't believe that such creatures could exist until they had their own experience. And so many of these people have a difficult time dealing with it. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it. They're afraid to share the experience, afraid of being ridiculed. But some of them, it's a life-changing experience. And I run into this quite often.
Only a few people today believe in the existence of the Thunderbird. But all the same, this mythical bird has found its way into American popular culture. From fighter jets to car brands, the Thunderbird has left its mark.
It is a Thunderbird. I got it because it's a protector and it's going to keep my soul safe. That was why I liked this tattoo.
On an Emke, which means thunderer. And of course, as the folklore goes, the thunder and lightning that you hear, the rolling, the papapanawata, the rolling thunder you hear through the hills is caused by this bird flapping its wings. They believe that some of the valleys in the primordial days were shaped by this bird flying too close to the land and its wings swooped up the valleys. But today, it's seen as a positive thing. It's a very important representation of the spiritual world to us, and that we don't need to be predominated with the negative or the fear of it, that it's something that should live in you, edify you, let you know that life is good, and good is in control, and that you can relax and live your life. And that is what the Thunderbird means to us.
Well, I'm sure they've seen a bird, and it is a big bird when it flies. It does have a big wingspan, but I don't know what to believe. I've asked people around, and that's what they all tell me it is.
There seems to be a really good way of telling the huge wingspan of these creatures, something that you can eliminate some of the big birds around here, some of the hawks and blue herons and other birds. And a lot of the witnesses I've talked to, by the way, are people who have hunted, people who are familiar with the native birds of Pennsylvania, and they realize that what they saw was something completely different than what they had observed.
They saw the shape, the figure of what we saw and what's in our tradition, so it's the same.
For most of the residents in South Greensburg, the Thunderbird is an amusing legend.
If the Thunderbird is flying around here, he better watch out, because we have a big Boeing 700 plane coming into Latrobe 4 or 5 times a day, and it might get in the way. I believe in a lot of things I haven't seen, though, on various levels. So who am I to say?
I do believe in Bigfoot and all those other things out there. I believe in UFOs and things like that. I believe those things are happening. But as far as the bird, I've never seen it other than the blue heron, so I can't really, and I've never seen either one of the others, but for some reason I believe in them.
People should keep an open mind. I mean, we are not going to move forward in time if we don't keep experiencing new things. I think you have to keep looking, you have to keep listening, and you have to keep paying attention until we find out. And we have over time. Science has proven a lot of things that people thought were bogus, Science proved them wrong. So science eventually will catch up with everything. Hoping I live long enough to see some of it.
There's a whole lot that science can't account for or explain. And there's so much around us that we don't see, that we use every day, radio waves, television waves, and we don't see that, but we know that they're here. So what makes other entities, maybe if they're from another dimension, why would that be difficult to understand? I think everybody wants their story to be heard. And I would be in awe. Who am I to say that they didn't see what they saw? I wasn't there, so I would let them tell their story to me. I'm a safe place to tell a story too.
These things apparently go on all the time, but a lot of people don't know where to call or are reluctant to report things, and some people wait for weeks or months or years later, or they never report in. So there may be a lot more of this going on there than we have any idea of.
For his part, Eric Altman isn't discouraged by the lack of tangible evidence.
You would think if there was such a thing out there, that a lot more people would see it. We'd have physical evidence of it. We'd have video. Science would know about it. We would know for sure they're out there. Like the Bigfoot, they're 8 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot tall. They're supposed to be a giant primate that runs around in the forest. Thousands of people claim they see it. Why don't we have proof of it? The Loch Ness Monster is supposed to be this huge aquatic creature that lives in Loch Ness. And hundreds of people claim they've seen it, but we have no physical proof of it, except for maybe some grainy video footage. But people still claim they see it. How are these large cryptids surviving and still being seen without any proof? We don't know. And that's what makes our job even harder and challenging. We just keep going out there and we keep trying to find those pieces of the puzzle that are missing. And maybe one day we'll have the proof. It baffles the mind to think how such large creatures like the Thunderbird can fly around in our skies and only be witnessed from time to time and not leave any physical trace evidence.
There has to be some kind of population of them. And they are somewhere, and they will be found. Because they wouldn't be cruising through here unless they were within the area.
It could be here. I believe it definitely could be here.
Joe Meyer continues to look to the sky in the hopes of catching a glimpse of this giant mythical bird.
Since I've been hunting, since I saw that bird, I spend a lot of time looking up here and there too, especially when we're hunting up the mountains. Actually, anywhere, I look up quite a bit. Just, it's in my head now, you know, and I got a gun.
I'm sure I would probably freeze in fright. I would hope that I have my camera. I have my camera for everything else to take pictures of, but I don't know, I'd be thankful too. I'd be thankful that I finally get the proof that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I would like to see one. I think it would be a good experience. Yeah.
I'd love to see it again, like I said, but what are the chances? You know?
In one of the deepest lakes in the British Isles,
your hair stands on end, the back of your neck.
Swims a camera-shy monster that resembles a giant snake.
An evil thing, in league with the devil.
Something struck the boat.
So it was obviously something very large.
And there was nothing there but a black whirlpool.
It was so obvious what we saw. Confirms there's something there.
In the highlands of northern Scotland, the Morag.
She's behind you.
Scotland is a land of mystery and legend, and it is also one of the best preserved natural environments on the planet. This is especially true in the Highlands, where we find fertile valleys, majestic mountains, and beautiful bodies of water, like Loch Morar. This little known and little used lake is also home to a monster, the Morag. Nobody knows this place better than Viv Dufresne, the superintendent of Loch Morar.
My name is Viv Dufresne. I'm the Loch Superintendent on Loch Morar. This is my 25th season in the Loch. I came for the weekend, believe it or not. Never got away again. But I like it, I love it here. It is absolutely stunning.
But last summer, it wasn't just the view that captivated Viv.
Some very believable people have told me the monster exists, and I spend a lot of hours out in that loch. You know, many thousands of hours a year out there. Well, up until this summer, I'd never seen anything that would even make me, think there could be something there. My daughter and I were driving on the far side of the loch, and there's a high point just before you drop down where you see the loch for the first time at the back of the islands. And the loch was like a mirror. I mean, just like an absolute, not a ripple on it at all. And my daughter said, "What's that out there, Daddy?" And I looked out across the loch, and there were these two things. I did take a photograph of them. So they were travelling towards the islands, doing, at a guess, 10, 12 knots. Never seen anything like it on the loch before. But they were creating the weirdest wash I've ever seen. It wasn't like a boat wash. There wasn't the big V coming off it, but there was huge disturbance on the surface. I mean, I've seen hundreds of boats out there. I know what they look like. You can still see the land. So if it was a boat, surely it would show up as clearly as that. I had my binoculars with me, and it definitely wasn't kayakers. Something very big and just under the surface. I'll show you on the map where. So my daughter and I were up about there on the track. And then as we drove down the hill, they disappeared and there wasn't a ripple left in the water. But I say my daughter's convinced. There's no doubt in her mind whatsoever. This is the monster. Was it the monster? One thing is certain. These strange waves on the surface of the water left Viv shaken. Who knows? So as I say, it's the only thing in nearly 25 years that made me think, I'm not so sure. But I mean, it's been seen for hundreds of years. It's not a myth. I mean, it has been seen. Some of the old local people have seen it loads of times, and they've no reason to say they've seen it. They're not getting anything out of it at all. It's not being commercialised. Who knows?
Morag is a tiny village of 250 souls on the shores of the lake that bears its name, 5 kilometers or approximately 3 miles from Scotland's Atlantic coast. It is the second to last stop on the scenic West Highlands Railway that ends its journey in Morag, a quaint fishing village that has long been an important market for the inhabitants of Morag.
I'm Malcolm Poole. I work as curator to the local museum, Morag Heritage Centre. Born and brought up here, and that's about it, basically. Well, it's never been, prime farming area. Very shallow land, much of it covered with heather. It's very rough country. It certainly meant that people in the area had to look to the sea, and that's, I think, probably been a factor in people's lives ever since humans first came into the area. The railway to Morag reached here in 1901, and from being a very small crofting and fishing community, it suddenly became an important through route for 70, 80 years. Prosperous period was in the 1970s when modern fishing methods were bringing in phenomenal catches of herring, but that wasn't sustainable. And the herring markets moved elsewhere. The herring fishery here never recovered.
An economic shock that is still being felt in the region and that helped give certain areas their deserted appearance.
By European standards, a very sparsely populated region. Over the last 150 years, things have changed quite a lot. People have moved west. They're no longer the scattering of little settlements of 2 or 3 families all around Lochmorag that there were in the middle of the 19th century. Most of those have been abandoned. Lochmorag itself is actually one of the deepest freshwater in Europe. The eastern end, it actually plunges to nearly 1,000 feet, which is a depth that you don't reach until you're well out into the Atlantic. It is a large area of water with very few people dwelling around it to see what goes on, so who knows?
In this small corner of Scotland, where there are no strangers, the elders love to share their stories of the monster.
My name is Ewan MacDonald and I am retired. Oh, this is about 10, 15 years ago, at least, maybe more, 20 years ago. Two of our gentlemen were out fly fishing on the loch, and this thing appeared in the middle of the loch. It's 2 white wakes going down the loch. And then a head arose out of it, and it sort of moved itself around. Then the head went down and everything disappeared. We just didn't know what the heck it was. I've seen it again out here, up just the back of these islands there. There's 2 of us were in a motorboat, in a boat bigger than that. And we've seen this wake on top of the water. It was a calm day, pretty calm day, and it's a wake on this water. And so what the heck's that? Led the boat up and followed this wake, and we could see it in the shallow water, swimming away like this. And then once it reached the deep water, disappeared. Your hair stands on end, the back of your neck, you see. You feel sort of, that's something that's unusual, something you've never seen before. It makes you feel, I don't know. That's been seen a few times by quite a number of people.
The final witness on the list is Kathleen McNeil. While she was at her parents' cottage, she saw a strange creature on the lake. It could only be the Morag.
Well, I was up here when I took the photo. I just came over here, and I stood here and I took it from here. I was just lucky to be here at the right time with a camera. Yeah. So I was one of the lucky ones. A lot of people don't have proof. I have lived here all my life. You couldn't get a nicer place. Ever since I was born, I've been hearing stories about the monster. And I was desperate to see something, but I hadn't. So I was just so excited and a wee bit overwhelmed. I couldn't believe my eyes, really. There was a couple staying here at my mum's bed and breakfast, and they were sitting out just on the deck enjoying the views, and they shouted in for us to come out because they had seen something in the water. So I ran out And just directly down there, there was two black humps. They were quite large, probably, to me, they looked about that size each one, just in the water down there. So when I came running out and I had my camera and I shouted my dad to come out to see, and I managed to take a couple of photos.
They actually came in and shouted for us to come out and have a look. And my daughter Kathleen came out and looked, and she had her phone, she took a photo of it, and I was shortly behind her. And that's when I saw like two humps.
It was black. To me, it looked like each hump was about that. And the loch was just like glass, very flat. And as soon as they started going under the water again, there was a lot of wake and a lot of movement in the water, just round about the area where they were. So it was obviously something very large.
Approximately, it was a third of the way out, you know. So they thought it was a whale at first, but you don't get whales in fresh water. Certainly that day there was something, as I keep saying.
I think when I was describing it to a few people, it was kind of similar to what they had seen many years back.
There's been a lot of sightings, obviously, and I think some people are embarrassed to say they saw Morag or saw something that looked like Morag.
They said it must have been the monster, because it was the same thing that they had seen.
The descriptions of the creature vary from one story to another, but we usually hear of a body measuring between 6 and 12 meters, or approximately 20 to 40 feet, with a serpentine head. The creature is capable of traveling at high speeds on the surface of the water, its several humps protruding as it goes. The first credible sighting to catch the public eye occurred in 1969, when the fishing boat of William Simpson and Duncan McDonnell was nearly capsized by the monster.
Duncan passed away there a few months ago. A few months prior to that, we did speak about the monster, and he did mention that when they were coming back from a fishing trip up the loch, himself and Willie, in Willie's boat, they got an awful fright. I think it was around about the islands here. Something struck the boat. It kind of listed the boat over. Duncan says, and when he looked to see what it was, and this thing popped up, and it was like a big eel's. The neck was like a big eel with a face, big face, he was saying. And they struck it with the oar, and they struck it that hard, they broke the oar. And after that, the thing just disappeared to the depth, they said. It's only a few months before he died. I can't remember what we're speaking about, and he mentioned this, which makes me believe it kind of changed my mind from a big joke to, yes, there could be. So, definitely confirms there's something there.
At the time, a young man captivated by nature wanted to know more. He shared with us the impact the fishing incident had on him.
I'm Adrian Shine. I'm a naturalist. I've now worked on this subject for about 41 years. I began in 1973. Towards the end of the 60s, something rather special happened at Loch Moehau. Their boat was allegedly rammed with a water beast of some sort, a big one. And it made the news, and I read about it. I actually have the newspaper article. It said, 60-foot monster attacks Loch boat. And the story, inevitably, went worldwide. Some people from the Loch Ness investigation came over to Loch Moehau, investigated that sighting, that particular event, and then ran a series of expeditions, 1970, 71, 72. And one of their members wrote a book called The Search for Morag. This book is actually full of sightings, about 40 of them. There are two conflicting stereotypes. There is the multi-hump form, and there is the long-necked, shorter-bodied form. They very seldom appear together. And that's when I took things very seriously indeed.
The picturesque village of Morag developed following the arrival of the railroad in 1901. But today, it is an extremely quiet hamlet.
This is the village of Morag.
A guided tour with one of its illustrious residents, Alistair MacLeod, former city councillor and one-time proprietor of the village's only hotel.
The village is basically one street. It used to be the main road going through here, but the highway has bypassed it, and now you have a situation where it is only local traffic that is coming through. Well, this is a Moehau railway station, and at one time it was a very busy station. We had a post office that sat there and a little shop back here on the right. Because the village had been bypassed with the road, the post office closed and so did the shop. And the effects of that was felt in the hotel. And the hotel, of course, was built at the coming of the railway in 1901. I was 30 years the proprietor of the hotel. With it being the centre of the village here, we did all the weddings and the christenings and funerals and things like that. So sometimes the only time you met people was at one of those functions, and it was wonderful to have that.
It was here, in this hotel, that villagers met to talk about the Morag. And of course, the former owner of the place also had a story to tell.
I was out fishing on Loch Morag with a cousin of mine and his two daughters. I would reckon now it would be about 20 years ago. And it was a beautiful, calm evening, and we were sitting in the boat. And about 100 yards away, an object appeared from out of the water. It looked to me like the back of a bull. It was hairy, which caused it to be shiny when the water went on it. I immediately started up the engine of the boat and to head towards it. I wanted to investigate myself what this was, the two girls. And they got very frightened and they were shouting, they didn't want to go, but I wanted to investigate once and for all what was there. And when I arrived, it had submerged in the water and there was nothing there but a black whirlpool. So I stopped the boat on top of it and looked down into the water, but we saw nothing. I can only tell you what I saw. Over the years, many people have saw the monster here and have never spoke about it because it's just one of these things. People laugh, some people that have never saw it don't believe in it, and the people, when they do see it, very often they say nothing.
The myth of the Morag goes back centuries. At one time, the mere mention of the monster was considered a bad omen.
There's been tales about it ever since I was born. I've been hearing stories about the monster. The older generation, a lot of them, they thought it was bad luck. People said if they'd seen the monster, something bad would happen to their family.
As I grew up hearing about the monster, it was called locally the Morag. Some people said it was a sign of the death of a particular member of a particular family. Some people said it was the Gillises, some people said it was the Magdalens. It wouldn't necessarily mean that a local Magdalene or Gillis had died. It could be somebody in Nova Scotia or even Quebec, a descendant of the people of Morag.
Like Nessie, Morag's history goes back to the early Irish monks came to the west coast of Scotland bringing the Christian religion, and she's been reported at various points during history.
It is said that St. Columba, the man that brought Christianity to Scotland, walked on the top of the mountains here, the 8th or 9th century probably. He looked down and he referred to the beastie in Loch Morag, that there was a monster and even in these days. That would make the monster quite old, is right.
I suspect it's also tangled up with Celtic mythology as well. Echuska, or water horse, which appears frequently in Celtic mythology.
You see, there was a widespread folklore tradition in the Highlands of Scotland. Tales of the Kelpie or water horse, which actually used to devour travellers, dragging them into the water. A very bad thing, an evil thing, in league with the devil. Even to speak of it suggested that you might be part of the evil. So there was a strong superstition against mentioning encounters and unusual things seen in Scottish lochs.
But today, the monster has lost much of its evil reputation.
But as areas became more cosmopolitan, so these sorts of stories became relegated to warning stories for children, to keep children away from the water, which is a sensible thing.
A lot of people also joke around and say that they only see it if they've had too much whiskey. But there is good tales about it as well, and other people said she was good luck. I'm not sure what to believe, to be honest. I suppose I've had a good year, yeah. I got married and yeah, it's been good. So I'm hoping it's good luck since I've seen it.
In 1973, Adrian Shine came to these banks in order to investigate the monster of Loch Morar. At that time, no one had solved the mystery of the Morag, and the desire to capture this monster has become an obsession that has monopolized his time for many years.
At that time, I was a very young man. Quick fame and fortune awaited this national wildlife, natural history problem. Could I solve it? Could I be the one to solve it? I knew that aquatic creatures rise towards the surface at night. So then the place to be is in a little boat, and the time to be there is at night. And I rowed around Loch Morar, drifting at night in the hope of attracting an encounter. I was rowing along in the dusk, and all of a sudden there cruised out into the body of the loch a hump, a big hump. I stopped rowing, it stopped, and I began to push on the oars to get closer. And it stopped looking like this great hump, and it began to look like a huge semi-submerged head. Ripples broke away from it as it started to move towards me.
Was it the chance of a lifetime?
The moment of truth. Had to cough. Suspense. And it was a rock, 2 inches, 3 inches high. And those ripples that broke away from it were actually the wake of my boat having passed it. I learned that night, there is no such thing as a sighting which does not have an alternative explanation. But of course, we don't know whether all the alternative explanations are true. It only takes one of these sightings to be of an unknown animal for the whole issue to change.
Adrian Shine had no luck this time. But the residents of Loch Morar have been on the lookout for decades, and the mystery continues.
My name is Alistair McKellig. I'm involved in the fishing industry, lived in this small village of Morag all my life. As I say, my brother saw it, my 2 younger sons were aboard the boat. We all saw the same thing. Well, we're just out in a local fishing competition, which we regularly have in Loch Morar, and totally flat calm, not a movement in the loch. My brother turned round and said to me, "Do you see these 3 humps in the water?" And as we turned round, we saw 3 humps. And of course, we didn't have any camera aboard the boat at the time, but someone made a sketch just on the evidence that we're hearing. But it's a good representation of what we saw. We normally fish, maybe it's only 7 yards from the shore, very close in. We saw this 3 humps, maybe 50 yards behind the boat. And the humps came basically alongside the boat, past the boat, and totally disappeared. Where we saw this creature, or whatever, it's the deepest area of the loch. I think it's 330 metres deep. There was no boats close by us. The nearest boats were probably 4 or 5 miles from us, so, and it was just a strange feeling. We couldn't explain what the movement was in the water and why it suddenly disappeared. Our local newspaper passed the story on to the national press. In fact, front page of the paper it was as well. Then it just went from one newspaper to the next over the next few weeks. It says, "Lock up your loved ones. Run for your lives. She's scary, she's slimy, and she's back. The terrible creature of the Moehau has surfaced again. You know, we don't know if it's one creature or maybe more. We don't know if everyone's seen the same thing. That's still a mystery. But I know there's something there.
But Adrian Shine did not quit. Given the abundance of testimony, he decided to continue hunting the monster and refining his research tools.
One of the things that I noticed, but at Loch Moehau, when I looked over the side of that rowing boat, the water was very clear. And I thought I shouldn't be sitting around waiting up here, I should be sitting around waiting down there. And so over the winter of 1973 to 74, I built a small submersible observation chamber to look upwards against the surface in the hope of seeing a great silhouette swim over the top, because that a large predator might patrol along the shallow water. We could stay in there for about 2 hours, and I had a camera, of course, in there, and we baited it to attract fish, and of course we hoped something larger. And yes, we saw lots of fish. We didn't see any large creatures. And then the next year, in 75, we thought that there might be some skeletal remains. Maybe if an air breather had died, it might have come close inshore to make breathing easier. And so I built a little glass-bottomed boat, which we surveyed all the shallows, 200 miles of shallows around Loch Moehau.
Residents still remember the crazy exploits of the young scientist.
When I first met him, it was 41 years ago. He was admired for the amount of work that he put in looking for this. And he's probably spent a lifetime doing it, and he's still looking for something. I hope he finds it before he goes to the happy hunting ground. They probably point him in the right direction when he gets up above.
This is the way to where I used to have a base camp during the 1970s. It was after I'd used the little submarine. My expeditions had got a little bigger. I had some logistic support from elements of the British Army. We've had up to 100 people on this site, but that was a long time ago now. We came here because it was flat ground, a good launching beach for the assault boats of the Royal Engineers, which used to take my crews down the loch with the underwater television. We were not successful with that. It was fun, they were great days, and a lot of it happened right here.
Despite decades of research, Adrian Shine was never able to prove beyond a doubt the Morag's existence. He has even grown skeptical over the years, but as a scientist, he strikes to keep an open mind. And he never hesitates to return to the loch. After all, who knows?
I've known Adrian for a few years now. He is a non-believer in the monster, but he wants to prove scientifically that it's not there.
Sometimes some of the scientists that I work with would like to come and do work here, and so we come and Vivi helps us. And he is on the loch in the course of his duties a great deal. And so if there's one man who understands this loch, it's going to be Vivian Dufresne.
Waterproof's on, that's ready to go.
Together, Adrian Shine and Viv Dufresne combine over 50 years of experience on the loch. And today, he returns to track down the monster.
I was here each summer from 1973 until 79. We did come here in the winter, actually, as well. I did some diving here in the winter. We were bloody mad then, you know. It was cold.
Did you see the pictures in the paper from the bed and breakfast last summer? We were staying in one of the bed and breakfasts just along here. We've got a very bad photograph of the monster. They were on the sun deck or something, so it would have been out here somewhere.
What did you make of that?
It's certainly in a deep bit of the loch. It's not a rock, and it is something large on the surface.
Viv Dufresne was a die-hard skeptic until one day in the summer of 2014 when strange waves appeared on the loch. The two men returned to the exact spot where this strange phenomenon occurred.
Where I was...
Yeah, whereabouts were you?
See where the dip in the plantation there?
Yes.
That's where I was, just on the right-hand side of that. Whatever it was this side of that point, between that point and this point of the island. I'd love an explainable answer. So I can go back to Mr. Total Skeptic again.
But for Malcolm Poole, director of the Morag Heritage Centre, Scottish lake monsters are the stuff of legend.
One quite plausible explanation for some sightings are driftwood, and giant eels have been mentioned as a possible explanation as well. To be honest, deer are at the top of my list. They've been photographed swimming considerable distances from the shore to feed on the islands. So that is a possible explanation.
And we surveyed in 1975 200 miles of the shoreline, and we went all the way around the shore looking for bones, skeletal remains. Using a little glass-bottom boat, found an awful lot of sheep and deer bones, but we didn't find anything unusual. Looking for the sorts of things that people see and sometimes believe they're seeing large animals. Perhaps they are, and perhaps they're not. Things like boat waves, things like what we're generating now, but it's disappearing. The waves we are making can sometimes look like those multi-humps, what I call the sea serpent type sightings. That can happen.
Adrian and Viv are en route to the place where there have been the most sightings.
I mean, most of the ones I've heard of recently are down this end, it has to be said, but then not so many people go further up the loch now.
No, it can be a dangerous place.
Well, the canoeist that we lost last summer, it was blowing worse than this, and they were up at the head of the loch, and one of them drowned.
And it can happen so quickly too.
Yep.
It can really happen quickly. You've always got to have an escape plan.
It can change in a second.
Yes.
I mean, you're not even seeing half of the length of it here. The sunlight on the hill and the distance there, that's about halfway up the loch. So you've got the same again before you get to the top of it.
A large area of water with mountains around. The wind does play tricks on the water, and on a number of occasions I've seen things that made me look closer, but I always came up with an explanation for strange patterns on the water.
Because we're lying in the shelter of an island, the wind comes over the top and strikes down onto the water, and we call that a cat's paw, and that can happen. There's one, there's one. But if you were on the shore now and high up, you might see that as an animal surfacing and coming towards you with a wake. There are all sorts of things that water does which can be mysterious. There's as much rationality as imagination that goes into what people see. There's generally something that they are seeing. It's just a question of how we interpret it.
Adrian Shine and Viv Dufresne are still on the hunt for the Morag.
She's behind you.
Just keep your eyes open.
Well, Ewan and John McVarish reckoned they saw one in the islands here when they were fishing. And it was very calm, and they saw it under the water and shot off into the deep.
Yeah, this is it.
Look at it.
This is it. It takes some doing, doesn't it?
But chasing a lake monster is a bit like fishing. It's best to be patient and enjoy your time outdoors.
Look at that rock down there. That's
big rock.
It's
just the size of it.
Look at that. As far as I'm concerned, we've succeeded really well.
Not a hugely successful day. But if you saw her every day, it wouldn't be a mystery anymore.
No, that's right. The popularity of these mysteries lies partly in the attempts made to investigate them. And investigators sometimes have results. And sometimes, of course, the results are less mysterious.
Although many residents say they saw Morag, Adrian Shine now believes that this monster is a product of the imagination.
We are confident now that the multi-humps, the multiple hump sightings, are actually boat wakes. And that is where we begin to study the psychology of human perception. The color is virtually always described as dark. Sometimes the skin is described as shiny, as in reflective, as in wet.
It was a dark colour, a dark greyish black colour.
It was black, dark.
It was definitely dark grey or black. It was dark colours.
But then it often would be, because when you look at water, which often is reflecting light, silvery light, you see anything against that background, it will always appear dark, though it can also be characteristic of waveforms. Reports of size vary. The size here has been suggested as some 30 feet or more.
It was two large humps. To me, it looked like each hump was about that.
The total length of the humps might have been, I'm sure we've got to talk about 20 feet or 6 metres.
You know, the circumference like that on it.
I'll say between 6 and 20 feet.
We need context to judge size. In fact, the context that we require is distance. We can judge distance if we are on a textured surface, one like a patterned carpet, for example, but also if we are looking at waves, because the waves are a sort of pattern. As they recede, as the range increases, so the waves get smaller visually. And so that gives us a rough idea of distance and therefore size, of scale. And guess when sightings are made?
And it was a beautiful, calm evening.
And totally flat calm, not a movement in the loch.
And the loch was just like glass, very flat.
And the loch was like a mirror. I mean, just like an absolutely, not a ripple on it at all.
Seen this wake on top of the water. It's a calm day, pretty calm day, and it's a wake on this water. So what the heck's that?
And that's what makes it harder to explain, because it was so obvious what we saw.
And if you have no clues to distance, you will not know how big an unrecognized object is. Is it conceivable that a bird with a neck so big could actually be mistaken for a monster with a neck so big? These are explanations which are possible alternatives, though it doesn't necessarily mean the explanation is true.
But Adrian Shine's love of Loch Morar, to which he has devoted decades of his life, continues unchanged. Now that he no longer believes in the monster, he's determined to prove it doesn't exist.
What I did was to try and use the conventional scientific techniques to examine the environment, all the organisms at the very base of the food chain, And the conclusion has been, both at Loch Moehau and at Loch Ness, that there is not really sufficient food resources to sustain a viable, resident population of large predators. It does not, of course, preclude the possibility of large creatures possibly coming from the sea. Loch Moehau is actually closer to the sea than Loch Ness, but there's a problem there, and it is the fact that you've got a dam and a waterfall at the base of the River Moehau, which feeds into the sea, and a bit of a barrier for larger marine creatures like seals, like sturgeon, to come into it.
But the full weight of science means very little to those who have seen the Morag with their own eyes. And remember, there are many such witnesses.
So I do definitely believe in the monster. I think there's definitely something there.
That day, what we saw that day, they didn't convince me that there is Morag there, but there is something there. There's definitely something there.
Prior to me seeing it, I would probably be like everybody else and say that there wasn't such a thing in the loch.
I'm not a total believer in the monster angle. I think there could be something there. Well, there's obviously something there. I've got a picture of it, but I don't know what it was.
And that's what makes it harder to explain. It was so obvious what we saw.
The more you speak to people that saw something, the more I believe there is something there.
Things like this are probably better undiscovered. We'd take all the mystery out of it if there definitely was one and we'd discovered it.
You know, we don't know if it's one creature or maybe more. We don't know if everyone's seen the same thing. That's still a mystery.
But I mean, it's been seen for hundreds of years. It's not a myth. I mean, it has been seen. Some of the old local people have seen it, and they've no reason to say they've seen it. You know, they're not getting anything out of it at all. It's not being commercialised.
Loch Ness immediately optimised the sightings to become quite promotional in their attitude. That was not true at Loch Moehau.
Monster or myth, one thing is certain. The people of Morar do not want to turn their village into an amusement park.
I wouldn't like to see Morar become a Loch Ness. It's a beautiful place to live and it's very peaceful, and we're quite happy to keep it that way.
In the summer, we get tourists, but not even then, not like Loch Ness or something, where you've got thousands and busloads of them everywhere, you know. And I wouldn't really like Loch Moehau to become like that. I would never like to see it commercialised like it has been at Loch Ness. Although we've got our little resident, possibly, keep it our little secret.
Maybe I'm being selfish, but when you love a place, you want to keep it all to yourself, basically. Isn't that right?
Most of the tourist trade is in summer, but you get a small number of people drifting through in winter as well. People just come here for hill walking. A few miles to the north of us, we've got 3 peaks that are over 3,000 feet, which attract a lot of mountaineers each year. It's one of the attractions of the area. Boat trips out to the islands, white beaches to make you think you're in the Caribbean when the weather is a bit brighter than today.
It's the main beaches for this part of the country around about here. The waters are very safe, very warm as well, and very beautiful, as you can see.
And for now, the steam train remains the most popular tourist attraction.
In 1984, the railway company tried a special steam service between Fort William and Malig, but it became world famous when it was used in the Harry Potter films. And now we have hundreds of people every day just to travel across the viaduct that figures in the films.
As for Adrian Shine, he has since devoted his research to the Loch Ness Monster.
And that's what led to Operation Deep Scan in 1987, which was a very large expedition. We did sonar patrols, and we did get a series of contacts that we didn't understand. Just because I don't understand my sonar contacts doesn't mean they're monsters, it might just mean that I don't understand.
And a new theory is gaining popularity on the loch. What if Morag and Nessie of Loch Ness are the same creature?
Somebody did mention in the past that they're making out there's a big tunnel below the hill to Loch Ness.
Because both lochs run parallel to each other, they thought there could be maybe tunnels connecting the two lochs.
And we could be having a sheer monster here.
They thought it could be the monster from Loch Ness that had come into Loch Moehau.
No, that's one theory. I mean, I've heard the theory, but it's certainly not one. It's a long way to have a tunnel. It's a long, I mean, it would have to be one hell of a tunnel.
No, I don't believe that for 1 minute.
But as far as I'm led to believe, there was inconclusive, so we've got a Moehau monster and a Loch Ness monster at this stage.
I suppose you could say this, that if a lot of people, a lot of honest and sober people see large animals and we go and look and find large animals, that's not a big deal. If a lot of people see large animals in a large Scottish loch and there are not animals there, then that is more interesting, not less.